Here we go. This board meeting is held May 14th.
Autumn Tampa.
We're going to move on to
I just want to start
remind everyone to please silence your electronic devices. Please keep your mute button on unless you're speaking, and if you'd like to comment on an item, please use the chat button in the upper right corner. Okay, with that, we're going to move on to agenda item 1.1, adoption of the agenda. Trustee Garvey?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to make a motion to approve the agenda with the following changes. We'd like to delete item 3.02, measures of academic progress, known as MAP, for grades 9 and 10, and WBA. Also delete item 3.04, request for approval of the application to place the Delta Academy High School on an alternative performance framework, to submit the application to the Nevada Department of Education and to amend the charter contract. There is also additional reference material that has been provided for item 5.1, Council of Great City Schools review of special education services.
Thank you, Trustee Garvey. Trustees, I'm looking for a second.
Second, Linda Young.
Thank you, Trustee Young. Trustees, I have a motion by Trustee Garvey, a second by Trustee Young. Trustees, please say aye. You're in favor.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, that motion passes 6-0, noting that Trustee Cepeda is not in attendance. Okay, with that, we're going to move on to agenda item 2.1, public comment on agenda items. Okay, public comment during this period will include any comments that were submitted on agenda items. Cindy Crone has summarized each comment received on agenda items, and she will read them with the name of the person submitting the comment. Ms. Crone, are you there?
Yes, Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Jara. Autumn Tampa submitted a comments on items 3.12, 3.14, and 3.16. She states, to help with the critical labor shortage of teachers and substitute teachers, 2 full-time classified positions should be created, 1 for vacancy substitute teachers and 1 for day-to-day substitute. 3.13, Autumn Tampa stated, to help with all critical labor shortages, especially teachers and paraprofessionals in special education, higher pay and more respectful treatment by administrators and CCSD is desperately needed. Item 3.16, Stephen Salido wrote that his comments reflected the position of the entire Department of Education staff at the College of Southern Nevada. CSN educates a large percentage of ALTA hires and current staff. He said when developing the new substitute teacher pay scale, that not only the person's credit should be recognized, but also their education focus. He asked that the district recognize that an associate's degree in education or a highly qualified sub-certificate obtained by CSN is valued and should be supported with an increased rate differential on the new sub-pay scale. Item 3.16, Timothy Lee wrote that substitute teachers are educated professionals who deserve the same daily pay as that of a salaried teacher, special training seminars, and some sort of benefits. A feature for substitutes to opt in and opt out of automatic assignments based on the locations should also be devised to maximize placement and productivity. Item 3.16, Shirley Rubin states that Support to substitutes received is not always favorable and they feel undervalued. She would like the district to provide competitive salaries and to take a look at health benefits. She feels the current plan presents challenges. Item 3.16, Brooklyn and Reagan feel that substitutes are not treated with respect. They would like to receive unemployment benefits during the summer months. They have concern that ESY is not taking place on school campuses, which is an indication that they don't have reasonable assurance that school will go back to normal business as usual. They mentioned that the governor said people across.
Now, what is the normal business as usual? Because if they had a concern, I was listening to the talk this morning, they had a concern about children having to access digital technology, and they wanted to keep it the way that they always had it, which was dittos and papers. And how do they actually measure the maintenance of those children in those programs? I really don't know. They just got to have their paychecks. So shall we listen?
Across the city and state are not required to seek out employment so that they stay home, and feel that substitutes should also be given the same right. Item 4.01, Autumn Tampa wrote, this is an excellent document showing the need for adequate and more state and federal education funding for the state of Nevada. Item 5.01, Autumn Tampa wrote, along with more federal, state, and education funding, higher pay, greater support, and greater show of respect of all special education employees will help improve CCSD's ability to meet the needs of special education students and fill vacancies more completely and effectively. Item 5.01, Sylvia Lazos wrote that the Council of the Great City Schools review is thorough and is a useful roadmap. She asked the board to look at important aspects of the report that do not require money, which include having a principal at the cabinet level who ensures the system of higher education is working. With the vacancies CCSD has, hiring has to be prioritized. Curriculum for special ed students has to be developed. Task CPD with developing tier 2 and tier 3 structures and curriculum. And there should be integration with MTSS, EBIS, and ELL, and provide more special ed training for teachers and principals. Item 5.01, Carol Brenti wrote that her son has been denied an IEP several times, and only after now several attempts, he has qualified for IEP because of independent IEE evaluation. She is frustrated that he has lost all his chances of being accepted to a college.
Okay, so what is an independent IEE? An independent IEE is an independent evaluation that's carried out by the community, basically. Parent has a right to have a second opinion as to how services are provided. And that comes with an outside provider assessing the situation. So it's called fresh eyes, basically. But irregardless of that process, children in special education have a right to measure and maintain progress in public schools. And how that happens actually is because of the system that's supposed to be established to ensure that all children have access. And so, you know, what they're talking about is their job. It's their responsibility as board members to ensure that access happens for all children, and they have to question the district as to what they're doing to ensure that the level of maintenance is happening. So shall we listen?
Qualifying for scholarships that his peers are applying for, and that he's not able to obtain any letters of recommendations from teachers. And that is all I have on items listed within the agenda.
Thank you, Ms. Cronk. As a reminder to the public, any comments that were submitted in writing are posted as backup documents on your board docs under this agenda item. And that's going to close out this section of public comment. We are going to move on to the consent agenda. Trustee Garvey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to make a motion to adopt the consent agenda, noting that, well, first it's items 3.01 through 3.29, noting that 3.02 and 3.04 have been deleted. And then I just wanted to have a comment and that the board will agree if they vote yes, that the MOU, which is item 3.03 for Hazel Health,
that it is understood that the Student Support Services is still the main gatekeeper for these health service providers, and that they will be in the decision-making process as to where the location of this provider will be, and review the facility use permits, and that they will be responsible for forwarding the annual reports that are required from these providers to the board. And then also that they will provide a copy of the consent form that shows that parents can either designate the school nurse or FASA to be the trusted adult accompanying the underage student during the telehealth visit, or they can have the option of being called to participate themselves during that telehealth consultation. And just to provide the board with that update.
Thank you. Thank you, Trustee Garvey. Trustee Wright?
I second that motion.
Thank you. Trustees, I have a motion by Trustee Garvey and a second by Trustee Wright. Trustees, please cast your votes by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, that motion passes 6-0, noting that Trustee Cepeda is not currently in attendance. Trustee Ford, can you please read the warrants? Unmute yourself first and then read the warrants.
That might help. Okay. Ratified warrants as listed in the bills payable transmittal and board memorandum number 18/19/20 in the total amount of $115,672,891.96.
Thank you, Trustee Ford. Okay, with that, we're going to move on to agenda item 4.1, resolution to support additional state and federal funding for school districts. I'm going to turn this over to Trustee Cavazos because she is the representative for us on the Council of Great City Schools. Trustee Cavazos?
Thank you, Trustee Brooks. This resolution is to support additional state and federal funding for school districts. It is posted as far as in the backup documents. So I'm not going to read the entire resolution. I am going to read the beginning of the resolution as suggested. Whereas the COVID-19 pandemic is a monumental and unprecedented challenge, emerging quickly and demanding an immediate overhaul of the instructional plans and strategies of school systems across Nevada. That is the beginning of the resolution.
So immediate overhaul, what does that look like? And truly, who was benefiting? Because we can only look at the end data, which means that the number of children who are graduating versus the number of children who are entered into the system, and there are drastic, mishaps in there. Just so many kids not getting a basic service.
Written up a short summary that has to do with that we are asking for additional funding for resources. And this is in addition to the funds that are already expected from the federal government. So this is a resolution that is being shared by the urban school districts that are members of the Council of Great City Schools. And we are asking that federal funding for our educational needs be prioritized for our district. So going to the second page or the last part of the resolution, I will read the amount. Whereas the Clark County School District supports an additional $200 billion in federal relief for public schools nationwide. And this level of funding is the minimum needed by public schools to address revenue loss, cover mandate costs, and sustain and accelerate academic achievement trends over the past decade. Whereas Nevada school districts need this funding to be in addition to state education funding at 2019-2020 budget levels. So we are calling on our congressional delegation, including our United States senators and House of Representative members, to advocate for and approve additional federal education funding for our nation's public schools. And this is dated the 14th day of May, 2020.
Thank you for that excellent summary, Trustee Cavazos. Trustee Young?
Thank you very much, Trustee Cavasso. It's excellent. I couldn't agree more, very much with everything that was written on the resolution. It's much needed. We over the years have just been so underfunded in so many of these aspects of special needs and education in general for students. So if I'll wait for other trustees if they need to make comments, but I'd like to make a motion to approve the resolution as presented.
Thank you, Trustee Young. I don't see any other trustees in the queue, so I will accept that motion, and I'm looking for a second.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Trustee Ford. Okay. Trustees, any questions before we go? Good. Okay, trustees, I have a motion by Trustee Young, a second by Trustee Ford. Trustees, please cast your votes by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, hearing none, that motion passes 6-0, noting Trustee Cepeda is not in attendance.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we're going to move on to agenda item 5.1, Council of the Great City Schools Review of Special Education Services. And this is being presented by Michael Casserly, the Executive Director of the Council of Great City Schools. First, I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Jara.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, first of all, let me back up and just thank you for your leadership on the resolution and the extra funding and really advocating on behalf of our students. So I think it shows a leadership to really look and find ways to bring in some federal dollars directly to the school system. So I'm glad to be here and partner with you on this. And as I want to have an opportunity, as Dr. Casserly and his team will be presenting, I want to commend Dr. Deanna Jaskowski for her leadership. And really, as soon as she was appointed into her role as the Associate Superintendent for Special Ed, she saw the great need and really looking and having some outside folks coming in and spending some time and giving us a roadmap for really addressing some of the needs that we have in the district. So I just look forward to hearing from Dr. Casserly and his team from the Council of Great City Schools. But before that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Jaskowski, who has some comments to share with you and some of what the process was like. So, Dr. Jaskowski.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Jara. My name is Deanna Jaskowski, and I proudly serve as the Assistant Superintendent of the Student Services Division. I want to thank Dr. Jara for asking the Council of the Great City Schools Strategic Support Team to conduct a thorough review of our special education services. This review consisted of the Council of Great City Schools Strategic Support Team, meeting with parents, guardians, advocates, community members, support professionals, special education and general education teachers, school administrators, student services division personnel, central office personnel, and cabinet members. I want to extend a sincere thanks to all participants. They were a critical voice in the creation of this report. An extensive data review. I'm very proud to serve a division of incredibly dedicated personnel. We are so proud of the commendations in the report, but we know we have a lot of work to do together with our families, schools, and community to better provide service and supports for our most vulnerable students. As this report was created by many voices and an extensive data review, the work to increase our services and supports will also be with many voices from our family, school, and community. With that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Michael Casserly, Julie Halbert, and Sue Gam to provide an overview of the report, Improving Special Education Services in the Clark County School District.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board and Superintendent Jara. I'm Michael Casserly, the Executive Director of the Council of the Great City Schools. I just wanted to say that it's great to see everybody again, and I hope that everybody is staying well. Before we begin our presentation tonight, I just want to thank and commend you for passing the resolution that you just passed, petitioning Congress for additional education money. It is going to be badly needed, not only by the Clark County School District, but by other major urban school districts across the country. So I just want to urge you to, now that you have passed it, to go ahead and send it to your congressional delegation and make sure that they know your wishes. And we will all be pulling together to try to secure the funds that I know that you badly need. Tonight's presentation is going to include a brief overview of the study that we have prepared called Improving Special Education in the Clark County School District. We will also present and summarize major findings.
Oh, amazing. Now I have to find that report because I want to share it with you.
Findings and the results of the data analysis. We can go to the next slide now. A summary of the findings and the data analysis that we conducted on special education in Clark County. We'll also have a few words about contextual considerations that we wanted to make sure that the trustees and the public were fully aware of, and then we will present a set of recommendations to the school district. With me is Counselor Great City Schools Legislative Council and special education expert, along with Sue Gam, who is the former Chief Officer for Specialized Services. Next slide, please. Okay. Sue Gam, who is the former Chief Officer for Specialized Services for the Chicago Public Schools, former official with the Office of Civil Rights in the U.S. Department of Education, and a national special education consultant to the council. In addition, there were two other people on the council's strategic support team, including Sue and Julie. One was Janice Mitchell, who is the Senior Director of Special Education Services for the Norfolk Public Schools, and Marie Maldonado, who's the former Assistant Superintendent and for the Department of English Learner Programs. Analyzed untold numbers of data files and the like, and we provided oral and written briefings and feedback to the senior staff of the Clark County Public Schools, received their comments, and worked on the contents of the report over that.
Dr. Casserly, can I have you pause for just 1 minute?
Yes.
We actually don't have the presentation up because we're having some technical issues. So hold your thought for like 30 seconds. Let me figure out if we can fix this, okay?
Got it, got it.
I'm sure you are used to such technical issues happening.
Right. I am more than used to it. What I can't do is fix it.
All right, there are a lot of people on, and this is causing some issues. Let me see how many. Are there people on the line from staff that are not here for this presentation that we can have maybe drop off until the Superintendent Jara? Not you. You need to stay, but
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Can we have staff, can we log off, if you can log off for this presentation except Dr. Jaskowski and Dr. Larson Mitchell? Everybody else can log off for now. Thank you.
Okay, let's get down to like, let me see how many are. Okay, do we want to try perfect, let's try this presentation again and see if we can advance the slides.
All right, why don't we, shall we go to, shall I reiterate?
Sure.
Okay, why don't we go to slide number 2 and do a quick recap. I'm Michael Casserly, Executive Director of the Council of the Great City Schools, and we are here tonight to present our report on improving special education in the Clark County School District. Our presentation is going to include a brief overview of the study, a summary of the findings and the results of our data analysis, and discussion of contextual considerations for the board and the public's information, and a series of recommendations. So we can go to the third slide right there. Perfect. So with me is Julie Wright-Halpert, who is the Legislative Counsel for the Council of the Great City Schools and a special education expert, along with Sue Gamm, who is the former Chief Officer for Specialized Services with the Chicago Public Schools and former official with the Office of Civil Rights and a National Special Education Consultant. In addition to those two, the team consisted of Janice Mitchell, who is the Senior Director of Special Education Services for the Norfolk Public Schools, and Marie Maldonado, who is former Assistant Superintendent for the Department of English Learner Programs in the Fresno Unified School District. As I noted a second ago, we include information in this report not only on students with disabilities, but on students who are English learners and English learners with disabilities. Our report is based on a site visit that we paid to the district on November 20th to 22nd. The team interviewed more than 170 central office administrators, school-based principals, staff members, parents, and advocates. We also analyzed more than 50 documents along with a considerable amount of data, and we provided oral and written briefings for the senior staff, received their feedback and the like over the course of those briefings. We can go to, I think, the fourth slide, areas of review. Next slide, please. Thank you. The report itself consists of a number of chapters, including a chapter on multi-tiered systems of supports, or MTSS systems, which we will describe, a chapter on demographics of students with disabilities in the school district, including data on prevalence rates, incidence rates by race and ethnicity, data on English learners and Section 504 students. We also have a chapter on achievement outcomes, educational environments, suspensions, and absenteeism. That chapter contains data on young children, achievement data from both the National Assessment of Educational Progress and state data, graduation and dropout data, suspensions, ELLs with disabilities, and educational settings. The fourth chapter is a chapter on promoting achievement and well-being for students with disabilities, and it includes information on instructional models, professional development, inclusive instruction, special schools, assistive technology, and transition services. The final chapter is a chapter on supporting teaching and learning for students with disabilities, including special education operations, leadership, personnel vacancies, funding, Medicaid, staffing ratios, transportation, and accountability. Our overall charge from the superintendent was to conduct a thorough review of the special education programs in the Clark County Public Schools, and to provide a series of recommendations for including the special education program and improving teaching and learning for those students. Each chapter in the report has a listing of strengths or accommodations, areas that we thought needed improvement, and a series of recommendations. Next slide, please. We do want the trustees and the public to know that our special education review of the Clark County School District and the report that was written was done so largely before the COVID-19 pandemic. The team did not have the opportunity to collect or review additional information about the district's operation after the virus became evident. Nor did were we able to include any information on special education or related services and how they were conducted to students with disabilities after the virus. After we present a series of findings and results from our data analysis, I want to double back on a series of contextual issues that affect not only your special education programming, but your overall results. These contextual factors include the district's academic decentralization, your overall instructional programs, your funding levels from the state, your weighted funding formula, and your class sizes. We will do that before we present our recommendations. So next slide, and I'll turn this over to Julie.
Good evening. I just want to make sure you can hear me now. Good evening, and pleasure to join you. First, what we're going to talk about now are disability demographic. And we're focusing on a good bit of data. And the reason for that is so critical for the district to be able to ask the questions, to be able to say, why do these numbers present the way they do? What do they actually mean? We're encouraging, we had was wonderful working with Dr. Tchaikovsky, Dr. Lars Mitchell, and with all the staff and the families and the teachers, and really being able to have conversations and the focus groups to determine how the district can collaboratively work together to peel that onion, to target your resources, and to do so strategically to address your students' needs and to change your district and the students' trajectory. Please go to the next slide. So what we're looking at here is a comparison of special education prevalence rates. Overall, Clark County School Districts enrolls approximately 320,000 students in grades pre-K through 12. Of this number, approximately 40,000 students, 12.5%, have IEPs. The district's percentage is lower than the nation's rate of 13.7%, and also is the same as the state's rate. So this just kind of gives you an overview, if you go to the next slide, please, of what your numbers look like. Next, this chart that we're going to look at is a comparison of common disabilities prevalence rates. What are we looking at? The status shows the percentage of students in the district, the state, and the nation by the 6 most common disability areas. These comprise about 95% of all the students with IEPs. These disability areas are specific learning disabilities, autism, speech language impairment, other health impairments, emotional disturbance, and intellectual disability. Clark County School District disability rates are similar to the states in the area of SLD, with the district being 52% and the state 50%. Under speech language, you can see on the chart that 13% is the district's rate and 15% for the state. Other health impairment is 10 and the state 11 respectively. And then if you look back over at ED, you will see that they both are at 4%. And then for ID, you're looking at 5% and 4% respectively. What's important to point out to you is that the district's rates are higher than both the state and national rates in the area of autism and SLD. And then they are lower than the national rates for speech language. I also would point out to you that the data for ED and ID show comparable rates for the district, state, and nation. So again, like when I opened up and talked about why does this data really matter, it matters tremendously so that you can see where the district is in relationship to the state and nation. And there's some things when we do our work that you'll see commonalities to other urban districts, and then you will also see things, you know, that more so exist within the state itself. Next slide, please. Data in these charts show the number of Clark County School District students with IEPs by grade and number of students with autism. Generally, the number of students with autism at pre-K are approximately, you see the numbers, 3,568 students, and that is larger than any other grade. The number of students with autism at pre-K are 714 students. This is more than double the numbers at grades 11 and 12. This increase is likely due, this is really important to understand, but
so the real deal is the numbers are different because the children in the 11th and 12th grade are not there anymore because they didn't make the grade. And actually, the number of children who are in juvenile hall are the number of children that they're not responding in regards to their level of access to public education or public services.
It's due to an enhanced process of Clark County putting into place to find and to identify young children needing special education. As a result of that, you have your numbers that are.
She is talking about child fine, and child fine under the federal regulations mean that any child that's in between the ages of 0 and 3 years old have a right to have language development services or public services, social skills. I mean, that all takes place early in life. But if it's not happening for you, then you can understand why it's not happening for you in the end.
Higher for your pre-K students, and they also, it's very common that something that's called their developmental disability, it's 69% in Clark County. But this is a relatively higher percentage that you have, as well as with percentage, if you look down for the numbers for autism, again, those are at about 21%. So if you could go to the next slide, the reason why I was showing you those so you can see the comparison to understand, just the kind of looking at two particular areas. This particular chart looks at rates by grades and by common disability areas. So again, you're looking at pre-K, kindergarten, first grade, second to fifth grade. And what are we looking at particularly on this chart? I want you to look at the red graph on the second, at speech language development. I think it's really important to see, particularly here, when we were talking about the pre-K, how high those numbers are for developmental delay. But when you get into second to fifth grade, you're looking at a 43% rate. So it's really, these again, it's like another conceptual to understand what do the disability areas mean and what do we need to consider. We can go on to the next slide, please. So here, this data shows by grade level, elementary, middle, and high, the percentage of students in the common disability categories that we've been talking about. Okay. These figures.
So, speech and language disability, autism. I'm not sure what the SL is, or the other health impaired. I know that one. And this is ED. I think it has to do with behavior. And this is intellectual disability, but emotional disability. And I'm just not sure about that SL.
Show the areas of OHI and ID and that they're relatively stable, right? So we're looking at, it's 4% across the board for elementary, middle, and high. For ED, the number goes up a little bit from 3% to 6%. But then if you go across the chart and look at it, we're looking at a situation for autism in elementary schools is 18%, and then it's declining to 13% in high school. So again, this is a great opportunity just to understand the data and to see what it looks like in a charted form. But it's concerning for sure when you are looking at some of the differentials. Next slide, please. So here we are looking at.
Look at that. Isn't that telling? Black people have the highest disability ratios. Look, higher than any other ethnicity, just on the top of the chart.
Sue is going to talk to you. A lot of her expertise is around risk ratios and does an amazing job nationally in this area. So she will explain this and start to talk to you regarding this slide. Sue?
So with this slide, we are looking at the disability information, but now it's by race and ethnicity. And you start to see some differences. This slide shows that the extent to which one racial group of students has a significantly higher risk of being identified as having a disability and in need of special education.
But quite frankly, if Black children are the highest ratio, then they should be able to explain exactly what's working for them to move students forward. because the color of your skin has nothing to do with the ability of your ability to learn. So quite frankly, it has to do with what they're documenting, and that they're actually preventing students from making progress because they're not measuring the things that make a difference. These are all behavioral issues.
Compared to students in all other racial ethnic groups. Generally, no student group met the Nevada Department of Education's criteria for significant disproportionality, which would have consequences in terms of different district actions. Black students have the highest risk ratio.
Okay, disproportionate. Okay, that was just a statement that didn't make sense to me. Can we just have a little rerun on that? Let's try it again.
In the common disability categories that we've been talking about, these figures show the areas of OHI and ID and that they're relatively stable, right? So we're looking at, it's 4% across the board for elementary, middle, and high. For ED, the number goes up a little bit from 3% to 6%. But then if you go across the chart and look at it, we're looking at a situation for autism in elementary schools is 18%, and then it's declining to 13% in high school. So again, this is a great opportunity just to understand the data and to see what it looks like in a charted form. But it's, you know, concerning for sure when you're looking at some of the differentials. Next slide, please. So here we are looking at, Sue is going to talk to you. A lot of her expertise is around risk ratios and does an amazing job nationally in this area. So she will explain this and start to talk to you regarding this slide. Sue?
So with this slide, we are looking at the disability information, but now it's by race and ethnicity. And you start to see some differences. This slide shows that the extent to which one racial group of students has a significantly higher risk of being identified as having a disability and in need of special education compared to students in all other racial ethnic groups. Generally, no student group met the Nevada Department of Education's criteria for significant disproportionality, which would have.
Now, why no student group met the criteria for disproportionate, you know, the rate? I mean, African-American students are higher than any other subgroup in regards to this behavior infraction. But really, we need to understand the level of engagement that they're holding themselves accountable for.
Consequences in terms of different district actions. Black students have the highest risk ratio, and that they are 1.38 times more likely than other students to have an IEP, but their risk is below the threshold of 2 that Clark County uses to address this issue. Asian students have the lowest risk ratio of 0.47. Next slide, please. The data starts to look different when you look at risk ratio data by a disability area. Yeah, so the top part of this slide shows you the overall risks by race and ethnicity by each group. But as you start to see, when you start to look at it by disability, some of the risk ratios really start to pop up. So for example, overall, Black students are 1.38 times more likely than other students in all other groups to have a disability, but they are 3.44 times more likely to be identified as having an emotional disability, 2.02 times more likely to have a specific learning disability, and 2.13 times more likely to have an intellectual disability. White students with an overall risk ratio of 1.09 are 2 times more likely than other students to be identified as having a speech language disability. So this is data that it is important to look at and to start slicing and dicing to understand, to develop hypotheses about why does the data look this way, and to think about what kind of actions can be done in order to address this. And I know this is something that the district has looked at for some time, but I think it's good to look at this data annually to get a sense of how is it changing, how is it still problematic. Next slide, please. This slide shows the extent to which English learners are likely to be identified as having a disability compared to students who are not English learners. So their risk, English learners' risk ratios are highest for the area of speech specific learning disability of 2.63, and for an intellectual disability at 3.1. So again, this compares English learners to non-English learners, data that staff will want to delve into further. Next slide. And again, this shows risk ratios for English learners compared to non-English learners for those two areas of SLD and LD, and ID rather, by grade. And you can see again how this changes as kids progress from grade to grade. For the area of a learning disability.
Well, can't we just put Black children in this whole mix of the conversation so that we can see where Black children are scoring differently from English language learners that have additional money to ensure that access happens for them? But we don't know what's happening for the Black community or the formerly enslaved community, the formerly, you know, the children who came with integration. We don't have any data in regards to the differentiation of the data between the ethnic groups.
The likelihood that English learners will be identified is very low in grade 1, only at a 0.33 risk ratio, but it significantly increases to a 2.03 in grades 2 to 5, up to 3.5 in middle school, and to 3.24 in high school. And then for an intellectual disability, it increases from a 1.81 in grade 1 to 2.06 in grade 2 through 5, and up to 4.59 in middle school. It remains relatively high in high school, although it decreases somewhat down to 4.19. Next slide, please. So the next group of slides show data that present the extent to which students with IEPs are achieving according to state standards. In addition, you will see data showing the extent to which the district has relied on students educated in separate classes in schools, and along with rates for students with IEPs regarding absenteeism and in and out of school suspensions, which are factors that really influence achievement. Next slide.
Okay.
So in the next
two, now we have to stop, because she's talking about student achievement and the factor of, you know, student attendance. Well, all that's changed. I mean, they may have been able to say student attendance made a difference before COVID, but after COVID, we're looking at how they're reaching the students. And because they don't have the data, it's very critical to understand that they weren't being serviced in the first place. You need to understand, if you don't have a way to engage a child, it's because you never engaged that child. So you don't have the data, and it's real.
Slides, we're going to look at the young children. Sometimes we call them the babies, kids aged 3 to 5 years of age. This slide shows you an area that the state, all of the states across the country analyzed based on the state performance plan template that's issued by the U.S. Department of Education. And it's common across all of the states. They look just like that. The difference is each state establishes its own target for kids, and in this case decides how they're going to measure these 3 areas. This specific slide shows the areas of achievement of young children with disability based on 3 components: appropriate behavior, acquisition and use of knowledge and skills, and positive social emotional skills. In this first slide, we're looking at those students that substantially increase their skills.
So do we have to believe that from state to state, that your opportunity to learn changes because of what? It doesn't change. You have the right to reach the maximum levels if you can do it. But it's really about how services are provided to the people and how they demonstrate the maintenance of effort. And I don't see it here.
Meaning that these children entered an early childhood program below developmental expectations, but they substantially increase their skills by age 6 or upon their exit from the program. Here, the district rates were below state targets in 2 areas and exceeded in 1 area. So this chart basically shows students who made growth. For the first area of positive social emotional skills, 72% of the children met the standards, which was 8.6 points below the state target. For acquisition, use of knowledge and skills, 72.3%, about the same met standards, was 8.3% below state targets. But in the last area, you could feel good.
Don't we really want to know which children are not making the state standards and what they're planning on doing to ensure that that access happens? That's not what we're talking about, is it?
For appropriate behavior to meet their needs, 94.7% of the young children met standards, which was 14.4 percentage points above the state target.
So if they had that many children who had the appropriate behavior, why do they have this significant disproportionalities? I mean, it doesn't make sense. We're trying to apply the data, but understand 100% of one is still 100%. So we're getting to where we want to be, actually, as they're doing this presentation. There's no accountability. Understand that.
Yes. Next slide, please. This slide shows that the percentage of children that actually met age expectations upon leaving early childhood or upon the age of 8. Here, young children did not meet the state target in one area, but exceeded them in 2 areas. For the first, positive social emotional skills, 51.2% met standards, which was 8.1 point below the state target. For acquisition, use of knowledge and skills, 56.2% met standards, only 0.2%, just about there, above the state target. And for appropriate behavior, again, with a high 89.4% meeting standards, the district exceeded the target by a whopping 23.8 percentage points. Very good. Moving to the next slide. Now we start to look at what kind of an environment are these children being educated in. And we, as well as the literature and research, really looks at the issue of inclusivity and the extent to which that promotes achievement.
No, that's just not how it works. Actually, when you're working with children with special needs, you have to do an assessment to determine where they are. And then you have to do an assessment regarding the services that you're offering. And then you sit around the table and then you figure out what's helping and what's not. So it's just not about a blanket approach to public education. And the problem is that they're looking from children from 3 to 5, when they should be looking from children 0 to 3 to ensure that their needs are being met as they're developing. They start way too late to have some outcomes.
Of students, as well as social emotional skills when they interact with young children. In this particular slide, there's, I thought, a really concise and on-point quote that was included in California's statewide task force on special education. Unfortunately, I could not find a similar report in Nevada, but California's is very good and is universal in many ways and applies to the children in Nevada as well. And as you could see, what the task force found is that most 3 to 5-year-olds with disabilities learn best when they attend preschools alongside their age mates without disabilities to the greatest extent possible. These settings provide both language and behavioral models that assist in children's development and help all children learn to be productively engaged with diverse peers. So that's the goalpost, if you will. Next slide. Bringing this issue back home to Clark County, we see the percentages of young children who receive most of your special education services in general education and those in separate schools, special classes and schools. And again, these are the demarcations that are set forth by the U.S. Department of Education in their state performance plan template. And as this data shows, Clark County children are educated separately from children without IEPs at higher rates than those of the state and nation. When looking at, in the first group of rates, children educated in regular education classes most of the time, 38% of the district children are educated in this setting compared to the nation's 45% average. The district's rate is 4 points higher than the state's lower rate of 34%. On the other hand, 53% of the district's young children are educated separately, compared to the nation's much lower 26% and the state's lower 43%. So there's room to move in this area. Next slide. So these two slides focus on NAEP scores, if you will. This particular slide focuses on reading, and the next that we'll look at in a minute focuses on math. And we're able to look at this data because the Council of Great City Schools began the TUDA project, or Trial Urban District Assessment, which is composed of districts that voluntarily, which takes some bravery, I'll say, to put your scores out there to the country and to show through public reporting their scores on a NAEP for grades 4 and 8. The reporting began in 2002, and in 2019, 27 urban districts participated. This has enabled us to benchmark, if you will, the district against all other districts that are publicly reporting their scores, as well as all districts that publicly report and the nation's public schools. Clark County has been a participant in TUDA since 2017. So this chart, now I must say we used basic and above, because unfortunately if we used proficient, the percentages would be very, very low.
Oh,
so
wow.
we stuck with basic and above. So
that's funny. So they picked the starting point of where they wanted to start to make them look better. Because if they use the original starting point, they would look things would look very, very different. And I think they have a responsibility to acknowledge the reality is things do look very, very different from their presentation.
Give you a sense of where the potential growth might be. And what you'll see is these districts, and in the report you'll see what all these abbreviations, they're very small here, much larger in the report, and you can see what each of the initials for each of the districts stand for. But they're in descending order, and you will see that pink is Clark County. All the council districts are in purple, and national data is the darkest, which is black. So you can see about where Clark County is in reading for grade 4 and grade 8. The diamonds reflect the difference, either growth or lack of growth. If you on the right-hand side, you'll see there's the 0 is in the middle, which means no difference between 2017 and 2019. The positive rate going up shows that that district increased their rates, and the diamonds going down shows that they decreased their percentage point growth in a negative way. I might, for comparison, there's 3 districts out there, interestingly, that they were all from Florida, and they were Duval County, Hillsborough County, and Miami, that surpassed national data rates in all 4 categories, reading, math, and both grades 4 and grade 8. Clark County's 4th graders exceeded the rates for Nevada in both reading and math, and exceeded in reading for 4th grade the national rates. So, hurrah for grade 4 in 4th grade. So here you could get a sense of where Clark County sort of lands, fairly high up, only like fifth, if you will, in for grade 4 math, and further down the road in grade 8 reading. Next slide, please.
Where are the children going?
And here we are for math. For 4th grade, it's almost, Clark County's about in the middle of the road, and for grade 8, a little farther down. But again, much more detail is described for these charts in the report. Next slide, please. So this chart shows for the state assessment, which again was reported on the state performance plan that was issued by the state. And what this shows is the percentage of students in Clark County that met or exceeded statewide assessment standards for 4 years, from 2015-16 through 18-19. And as you can see, the achievement rate somewhat decreased for math and remained steady through those years for reading. In math, the earliest rate was 10.2% and decreased 4 years later to 9.8%. In reading, the rates varied through the years and began with a 12.8% at 15-16, finished at a 12.5% at 18-19. Again, this is meeting or exceeding state standards. So next slide.
Are they serious?
So this changes by grade, the percentage of students that meet or exceeded. And it shows the percentage point differences between the district and the state performance plan by each grade. And the triangle, if you will, shows the percentage point difference between the rate of the district and the target that was set by the state. So in general, the district's rates were higher in reading, ranging from 17% down to 16%, going from grade 3 to grade 11. And then only in 3rd grade was the rate higher for math than it was in reading. In math, it was 17%, reading it was 22, I'm sorry, vice versa. In math, it was 17%, and in reading.
Okay, now I'm confused. Look at the numbers. Look how it's going down. The older the children get, the number of children who are at tasks and on tasks are below. How is it that at the end of the day, you have 6% of your 11th graders, and and the difference is 32% nationwide, but only 6% are meeting the basic standards? I'm confused.
Reading, I'm sorry, reading was 17%, math it was 22%. So only in that grade was it reversed, but in all of the grades, the percentage goes down through the years. And
so how does that work? I am so confused. The number of children, or the percentage of children who are reading at or above, they're not even at the 50% level. Let's talk about this.
The percentage point difference varies through the grades. And again, our full report actually looks at Focus 24, which has as one of its priority areas several objectives relevant to the achievement of students with IEPs. These pertain to decreasing student proficiency gaps in English language arts, math, and science, along with associated and very detailed data. And I refer you to that report to look at that information. Next slide, please. So these charts refer to graduation and dropout rates for students with IEPs and all students with IEPs, and then the gap between the two.
You see, the problem is they don't have any ethnicity here. They're not talking about the students, they're just talking about the numbers. And notice the numbers are great, but they're not talking about the differentiation of the color of the students. What we're really looking at is the students with IEPs and students with no IEPs, but it really doesn't matter if you have an IEP if you can't measure the maintenance of effort. It just doesn't matter. So here, I don't know what we're talking about. We're talking about the low number of children who are really actually engaged in the educational process, regardless of their disability. And so we're talking about the student's ability and what you are measuring to ensure that access happens.
Percentage point gap between the two. The first, and that's over 4 years. In the area of graduation, the rates for students with IEPs increased from 28% to 68% over the 4-year period. A major part of that increase was due to the associated changes in state law, which I think were very progressive, by the way, which were relevant to students with IEPs. And those particular changes, both for students taking regular assessments and students taking alternate assessments, are described fully in the report. In terms of, you can see the percentage point gap fell from 48 points to 17 points over that a 4-year period. So next slide. I'm sorry, go back again. I want to address dropouts. So in terms of children who have dropped out, you'll see there was a somewhat of an increase for students with IEPs from 4% in their first year to 4.7% 4 years later. Rates were higher in the middle, and the gap ended at about the same, with a 1.1 percentage gap in the beginning and at the end of those years. So now I'm going to turn it over to Julie, I believe.
Next slide, please. So now Sue really introduced the topic of inclusion with our youngest kids. And we're going to continue. This is a quote from the Swift Center. And what I want to emphasize is what it says within it. Clearly, we understand the value of inclusion and why it matters so much, but the research absolutely shows how important it is that students learn together and they're given appropriate instruction and supports in order to participate, learn, and excel together. But what I want to emphasize to you, that the research also shows how imperative it is for the leadership to engage and for the culture of the community and for the organizational structure and all to join together in building an inclusive educational framework. And that means working with your families and your community partnerships. And I just want to emphasize that the research shows how critical this is, especially, and then for you as board members, as far as developing policies and practices to provide the backbone into these features. So I just am emphasizing overall just the value of inclusion, and that the research itself strongly supports it for many decades. Next slide, please. Data in this chart is collected by the Nevada Department of Education, and it shows the percentages of IEP students looking at 3 educational settings. So what I would like to do is first look on the far left column, an example here where students are in general education at least 80% of the time. Okay, so that 80 to 100% of the time means that these students are included the most possible within the school day. So first looking at the district's rate of 52% for students in this setting, and then is 12% lower than the state performance target of 64% and the nation's rate of 64%. So it's important, again, like we look at this, look at the Clark County School District at 52%, the nation at 64%, you can really start to see, what do these numbers look like and what does that mean for the district in comparison, to the nation, as well as to the state targeted and to the state itself. And then if we go and you look to the far right column, looking at separate schools, this is an area where the district, the number, is 1% comparative to your state, as well as the target then is 2% and the US is 3%. But what's really, I think, key to point out, and which I want, really, I know it's hard because we're all virtually, communicating here, but it's really important then to look in that middle, look at that 0 to the 39%, and understand at Clark County School District, those are students that are separated 0 to 39% of their day is at a 20% rate compared to the US at 13%. Now your state as well is at a 15% rate, but you're 5% more separated within that area. And
I think what she's talking about is that they have a higher rate of kids who are in segregated classrooms, meaning classrooms for special ed or special need. And they're not holding themselves accountable. And see, you can get a high school diploma, not a diploma, but a certificate of completion without making minimal progress towards your level of education. Understand that that doesn't represent your level of intelligence.
That's something, again, like when we talk about the data and what we need to break apart to look at and understand why. Like we're spending a lot of time on the data, but the data raises a lot of the questions that we address in the recommendations. So next slide, please. So here, I'm hoping that you can see all of the colors, and I'm going to utilize some of them as examples. But what we are looking at here is the percentage of students educated at various educational settings by grade. Okay, so we're looking at grades from K to 12. Generally, students with disabilities beginning at kindergarten with a high percentage of inclusivity, right? This pattern starts to go down in first grade and continues to 7th grade. Then you start to see a shift at the next point where beginning in 8th grade and continuing through high school, the trend actually changes, increasing the proportion of students educated in general education more of the time. So again, if you look at that 80 to 100% mark that I was just talking to you about.
And even if the children are educated in general education classes, we're not talking about the student's ability to achieve. We're just talking about the targeted end group of children and their placement. We're not talking about the student's ability to engage in the process and actually demonstrate that they're learning.
And that is, looking at how that goes from 73% of inclusion, then the differential as far as going less and less included, and then it starts to go back up again. The trajectory changes in 7th grade. So I just point that out. It's very interesting to be able to see not just what exists across the district, but within each individual educational setting, and then at kind of each part. And these are the 4 areas in which that we have to report to your state as well as to the U.S. Department of Education. Next slide, please. So here we're going to break it down and look at in the actual area. So this is general education, at least 80% of time by disability area. This chart reflects where students with specific disabilities are included in general education at least 80% of the time. So what are we looking at here? You have, in the area of SLD, you're looking at students in the Clark, in Clark County School District, it's 54%, but whereas the nation is 72%, right? So you can see that look at that red bar going up as far as what that would look like as far as the nation being more inclusive than the district. Additionally, in other health impairment, you can see that trajectory as well. In autism, you see, in each one of these situations, you see, for example, in autism, the district's rate is 32%, whereas the state's rate is 40%. And then again, you're looking for ED, it's 37% for Clark County, and then the nation is 48%. And then it's very concerning, honestly, to point out, looking at intellectual disabilities, it's 1% for the district, and actually the level of inclusion, for the state is 5%, but for the nation is 17%. So listen, again, I think Dr. Casserly said this, applauding the district for the courage of bringing us in, being able to look at these hard questions and really to see where we can help the district, to move forward. The next slide, please. So now the second setting that we're looking at is general education less than 40% of the time by the disability area. And in this situation, again, I say to you, what does this mean? What does this mean for the district? Students are in separate settings and self-contained a majority of their school.
Self-contained classrooms. We need to understand what a level of education is happening in those self-contained classrooms.
Days. In every case, the nation is more inclusive than the state and the district is more restrictive than the state and the nation. Next slide, please.
So that means our children being denied access based on the restrictive environment.
Okay, this data, again, we're talking about risk ratios, but we're talking about risk ratios in relationship to out of school and in-school suspensions. So for example, if you look at the out of school suspensions, students with IEPs are more likely than students without IEPs to be suspended, and the risk is highest for suspensions lasting more than 30 days.
Okay, so the law says if you're going to suspend more than 10 days, you must have a manifestation hearing to determine if the disability is based on the student's ability, or is it based on the behavior, is it based on the student's disability? So you can't hold that, infraction against the student if it's just based on the student's disability. But the mere fact that they're documenting children who have behaviors that have to do with their learning disability means they got it all wrong.
So if you look at the chart where it says 31 to 50, and then you're looking at what does this actually mean? Students with IEPs are 4.1 times more likely to be suspended for 31 to 50 days than students without IEPs. And then if you look for like 1 to 10 days for out of school suspensions, then you're looking at a risk ratio, if you go to the column all the way to the left, of 2.05. But this just gives you an idea to be able to really compare where the differences are. And then for in-school suspension, students with IEPs do not receive an in-school suspension. Everything is below 2.0, right? So it's not disproportionate. However, it's interesting to point out that the risk ratio is highest, again, when you go to that 31 to 50 days. So it's 1.78, but it's something to point out what is going on in these particular areas. Next slide, please.
Oh,
So
that
this
hurts.
slide particularly looks at IEP racial ethnic risk ratios for out of school and in school suspension. So what does that exactly mean? We're looking, for example, for both OSS and ISS, for African American Black students are suspended at a disproportionate higher rate. Now, I know that you've done other reports and had different information, but this again confirms different data that has been collected by the district and that we collected.
It certainly is that they know that they have a problem that they have not addressed.
As well. For American Indian students, they have the next highest risk ratio at 1.556. And then again, when you're looking at in-school suspension, Black students are 3.34 times more likely than other students with IEPs to receive an in-school suspension. And then the American Indian students have the next highest risk ratio of 1.27. So clearly, it's concerning where you're seeing these risks.
Okay, so I just want to know by grade level and by age level, where are these children and where are they schooling? Because if you have that high number of percentage of children with suspensions, then you can't tell me what's happening in regards to their learning environment because you're not measuring that. You're only measuring this data.
Ratios for Black students at 3.39 for out of school suspensions and 3.34 for in-school suspensions. Next slide, please. So this slide is using a risk ratio methodology. The data shows the likelihood that students with IEPs from a racial ethnic group will receive an out-of-school suspension or in-school suspension. And you're actually comparing to students in the same racial ethnic group who do not have IEPs. It's the same racial ethnic group with and without IEPs. And again, we see here in this particular chart, I just bring your attention to American Indians who look comparing to the same ethnic group. They have a significant risk ratio of 2.56 for out-of-school suspensions and 2.18 for in-school suspensions. And I would also, point out for your Black students that remember this number is not as high because their disparities in each area is smaller among students with and without IEPs. And that's in relationship to the other numbers that we were just looking at because there's so many, the numbers are high as far as themselves. Next slide. So this is an interesting slide to kind of understand where students are engaged in education or work 1 year after leaving high school. So this chart looks at the district and the state performance plan targets. So what you're looking at under A is where students are enrolled in higher education within 1 year of leaving high school. So that's 18%. When you have a state target of the 28%. And then what is B? B is you're taking together the kids who are in higher education or competitively employed. So that number begins to rise. And then you see that under C, you have kids who are who leave high school within 1 year that are in higher education, that are competitively employed, or are in post-secondary education or training programs. So again, you're looking at a number of 67%. So clearly, that number is it's growing in the right direction, but we want to be able to do more, and it shows you what that is. Next, I'm going to turn it back to Dr. Casserly to share some other thoughts with you. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Julie and Sue. We wanted to take a look at various contexts in which your program operates. And the trustees and members of the public should know that the larger report contains a considerable narrative around the nature of the special education program in the district. But there are certain contextual factors that we thought affected not only your students with disabilities, but your English learners and probably your general education program as well. And one of the issues involved issues of decentralization. So next slide, please. I think everybody is familiar with Assembly Bill 469, which addressed the reorganization of large districts in Nevada, which at the time I think only covered the Clark County School District, but it gave local school control over various operational areas. In the past, the school district seemed to interpret Assembly Bill 469 to require school autonomy beyond specified areas of hiring, purchasing, distribution, and the allocation of funds. We actually think that this interpretation has resulted in the fragmentation and delay in developing and implementing system-wide structures designed to improve instruction and accelerate student achievement. We do applaud the leadership team at the district because we do understand from our interviews that they're addressing this history of decentralization and taking steps to rebalance the implementation of system-wide expectations and local school control, including reestablishing expectations and standards to support high-quality district-wide practices. Let me say, just as an addendum here, in my 40-plus years in doing this work, we've never seen an urban school district actually improve appreciably academically with the level of decentralization that Clark County historically has used. We have never, ever seen it in any place. I have spoken before, particularly when we released our report on operations about a year or so ago around the issue of school funding. Next slide, please. Here we sharpen our findings a little bit by noting that Nevada ranks in the bottom 5 states in funding its public schools. Nevada has used the same outdated funding formula from many decades ago that is not adjusted for Southern Nevada's growing and changing population. Your current per pupil funding level is well below the national average, and it is well below the average of other big city school districts across the country. As a matter of fact, from the data that we have on per pupil expenditure in all the big city school districts across the country, the Clark County expenditure per pupil was the lowest of all big city school districts in the nation. The Clark County average instructional expenditure per student was $4,796 compared to the great city schools median of $6,656 per student, placing the district near the bottom, again, of all urban school districts across the country. This has affected not only your general education program and its quality, but all kinds of factors related to vacancies and staffing ratios and the like in your special education program. Next slide, please. We understand that the state has established a new formula that includes weighted funding for English learners, special education, and other educational needs that are typical of large urban school districts, but we also understand that no additional funding has come with those weights, and it won't go into effect for an additional 2 years, meaning that the weighted student funding proposal isn't actually going to do you much good either now or further in the future. In general, the funding picture and the decentralization picture has created, in Nevada at least, a statewide school system with among the largest average class sizes in the country. This factor creates a significant barrier to highly effective and inclusive instruction, and probably presents an incentive to move students with disabilities into separate settings when teachers and administrators are faced with those kinds of class sizes. We do have a series of recommendations in the report about new partnerships you might be able to create and steps that you might be able to take in order to include or increase revenue streams to support lower class sizes. Also, one of the things that we found, next slide please, under the area of instruction, was that the Clark County School District's general instructional program appears to be highly defined at the individual school level. Again, going back to the issue of decentralization, we've never seen a big city school district across the country at any time in the decades that I've been doing this work, where the school district at large was able to improve the academic performance of students across the board by having such individual school level control over the instructional program. From our interviews and from our examination of documents, we saw that the school district generally lacks a portfolio of interventions to address the needs of students who are starting to slip behind. And the focus groups expressed a considerable concern about the lack of core curriculum and guiding documents that would inform the instructional program. For schools without supplementary funding through Title I, Zoom, or your Victory program, there's very few little other funding that exists to purchase instructional programs. In general, the school district appears to lack the professional development programs that would systematically build the capacity of its people to improve outcomes for students with disabilities. And this is exacerbated by the decentralized nature of the district and the individual school control of the instructional program. The problem is exacerbated by the district's low staffing levels compared to other big city school districts, born of your very weak funding from the state. And it is exacerbated by significant vacancies in almost every staffing area involving students with disabilities. The district.
So that's the issue. You know, they have significant staffing issues at schools where they have students who need additional support. That's where they place their neediest children in those schools, and with temporary positions, and they just don't have a commitment to do the work.
Has tried to address some of those staffing issues through contractual services, which probably help to some extent, but it does not fully address the problem, which in major part is attributable to unusually weak state funding of the district. So these are a set of contextual factors involving the organizational structure of the instructional program, your overall class sizes, and the weak funding of your school district by the state that has existed for many years, and it is affecting the overall quality of the instructional program in general education, but it's also having an outsized effect on your students with disabilities. Sue?
Sue, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, so let's go on to recommendations. Next slide, please. So we have all of this information, which actually is communicated to you in much more detail with a lot more narrative in our report. And we distilled the recommendations, which is a little bit, I guess, misleading in a way. Well, I should say 10 major areas. It's not 10 recommendations, but 10 major areas of recommendations. So let's go to the first one, which is the first slide. Next to the first one. And we start with a multi-tiered system of supports. And sometimes we go into a district that asks for, you know, a review of special education, such as Clark County. And they ask, why are you talking about general education? And why are you talking about this multi-tiered system of supports? Why we wanted you here for special education. What we like to stress is that special education doesn't start with special education. Special educators do not refer children for special education. That starts in general education. And unless the system has a very strong and robust foundation of general education and levels of support for students when they're first starting to fall behind, you might as well, you know, give up the ship. You're never going to improve achievement for all children. So what we stress is that the foundation of whether any child you're talking about, whether it's a child who's gifted, a child who has an IEP, an English learner, or your typical kids who are not in one of those categories but are diverse learners nevertheless, we stress the need to have a very robust system of supports that includes every single child in the district, and that every educational initiative, if you will, that the district considers fits into this tiered system of supports. So you could go, and there are many more sub-activities, if you will, that's connected to this. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go into detail on each of these slides, in each of these areas, but instead I'm going to point out just a few things that I think I'd like to bring to your attention that I have this opportunity. The first has to do with, and you saw all the data they were talking about. So the second area goes to, what do you do with this information? And basically this information is really important to look at where you're going in the future. For example, that spike of children with autism at the pre-kindergarten and first grade level in kindergarten, you're going to have to deal with them as they articulate through the district. And right now, there's relatively low levels. If you don't know that going in, it's going to be very hard to plan for them as they articulate to future grades. So basically, that second issue has to do with developing criteria for each of these areas, guidance for each of these areas, and one of the witnesses who testified today before we began talked about professional learning. Each of these areas involve lots of professional learning for every stakeholder group in the district.
Okay, so professional learning, it doesn't matter if you have it, if you're not willing to use the resources in the targeted need areas. So, you know, this race and ethnicity thing, this lack of graduation rates for certain children, and the lifelong impact of the failed services makes a difference. It really does. And so, you know, asking these questions and forcing the board to deal with it, to look at it, to understand what's going on, and to make better decisions is where we are.
Next, we're looking at actual achievement, where are kids educated, graduation, suspension, etc. And again, this is primarily looking at the data, looking at developing hypothesis, what does this mean, and actually sorting that data more and more granularly by region, by whatever area you could think of, so that you could be more targeted.
It's called accountability. How do you hold yourselves accountable? And you don't.
And spend your resources, human and fiscal and material resources, where you need them to make a difference. The fourth area has to do with academic instruction and positive behavior supports for kids. Now we're focusing on students with IEPs primarily. And the first area that I want to focus on is establishing an inclusive instruction framework. And this, by the way, is not in the province of special education. It's in the province for every education. There needs to be leadership at the trustee level for this. This is hard work. And unless people in the trenches know that their leadership has their back every inch of the way, that data that you saw.
Now see, just how does that work? Because that's not what the offer of free and appropriate public education means. It doesn't mean that your leadership has to acknowledge that all children have rights. All children do have rights. But if you're going to operate a district, then you have a personal responsibility to ensure that all children have access. And that's what I don't see.
And the opportunity to become more inclusive and more effective will never happen. So we're talking about, what's your framework? What's your belief system for inclusivity? And again, starting at the trustee level to the central office, down to the regions, down to principals, and down to schools, with everybody having their fingers in the mix, looking at what this vision would be, what the framework will look like, and what do you need to have in place in order to implement that framework. I want to mention the barriers. There's lots of barriers to achievement in the district. And I know it doesn't apply just to kids with disabilities and it's all kids, but we really heard it in our focus groups as we primarily addressed kids with disabilities. And
truly, if they were addressing the children with disabilities, they would understand what their needs are. And they would understand if they're making any progress. You just can't say, oh, the kid has a disability, they can't learn. That's not how it works. Actually, my son was deemed a child who was autistic and who was in the spectrum. And he made meaningful progress every year because I was at the table every year. And I would encourage parents to understand that they have to be at the table. But they have to ask for the data and the documentation that the program is being effective. with their children, and they're not asking the questions. I'm asking these questions and I'm getting no responses. So this is the most that I've ever heard, but it is truly exactly what I thought was going on, dysfunction.
A lot of this is with the context that Dr. Casserly talked about with your financial situation, but I would be neglectful if I didn't emphasize the very large class size and caseloads. Personnel shortages are impacting the schools tremendously, as well as the vacancies. And then the reliance, if you will, because of that, on teachers.
And so the vacancies, they're talking about the vacancies in the high priority schools, in the poverty schools, in the areas where people get to choose where they're not going to work. And that's just real. But I don't understand how people get to choose where they're not going to work if they're getting the additional support and training out of the money that's being generated by the children who are generating those resources.
Teachers who are alternatively certified, the long-term subs that you have in some of the hardest classes to teach, and the kids who are most vulnerable have the greatest shortages. Access to training, looking at scheduling, materials and support, and instructional support. So all of that.
And somehow they just feel that all those dollars that are generated by the children who are generating that money, and that money is not being spent on those children. And that's highly irregular. I mean, you know, irregardless of they made stronger programs in certain areas, they can't deny any child from any resource, but they're not giving resources to certain children. It just doesn't exist.
Is within that. I also want to recognize and give a focus on Read by Grade 3. I was so impressed by the state materials, and I would just urge you a little bit to look at your own materials, look at it with a lens around disability, with a lens around the coaches that need to be well versed in reading by grade 3. If they don't have the expertise, the teachers who they're coaching are not going to respect them, and it's not going to be useful. So a lot of this is, again, laid out further in the report. I just want to highlight those things. Next slide, please. Parent support and engagement, especially now. You know, I felt, Julie and I had a small conversation before we started. It's like, Julie, do they want to hear all of this with this pandemic stuff going on? But here we are. Some of the stuff you'll be able to do because it requires strategic planning. So, hey, you got time to plan maybe, right? Everybody's in planning stage. But now more than ever, perhaps, parent support and engagement is so important, not only to reach kids out through distance learning that you're involved in, but once schools are open and getting them back, and really establishing partnership and welcoming schools. I can't stress that enough, for parents of students with disabilities, well, parents who don't speak English well. That's really important. Interdepartmental collaboration. I wish I could go into a district and say, we're not going to address this issue because it's perfect. I don't think we have found that district yet. Maybe I could say that every district can improve. We're still used to working in our silos, but I think we gave some good feedback in terms of what we heard and some recommendations about how to leverage, your whole, so that people on the ground level. I always find it interesting that we expect teachers to be experts in all of these areas, but sometimes we look at our experts from central office and we say, well, that person does this and that person does that. And if you have this problem, I'll call that person. We need to cross-train, and more people need to know more, and to use the triage method, if you will, where more people know more, and you rely on your true experts, if you will, up the level to bring more information going down, so that you don't have to go up as much up that tree to get that information. And again, then we spent a lot of time looking at the students support department. Did I say that right? The student services department, operations. Every district has a different acronym for this group. The special ed folks, right? and really looking at the extent to which all of the personnel, or to the extent possible, but especially all of the folks who have a cluster of schools that they work with, are aligned with your regional superintendents. It's really important. We can't stress that enough, because if they have a common set of schools, they can strategize together, they can work together, and there's much less chance of fragmentation. You've got to use your resources in a wiser way. So I want to emphasize that. Next slide, please. So the three last recommendations are on this slide. Next, we look to school-based administration, the importance of principals. And virtually every district we go into, there is a clamor for more professional learning for principals. So they have more of the understanding of what oversight for special education and support for special education means. We talked about a boot camp, maybe next summer there will be a way to do a boot camp for principals. Maybe sooner, you never know. But that's really important. Their leadership is truly important. And we also focused on your special education instructional facilitators, or SEIFs. And you got a lot of them. And we gave you some options for ways that perhaps they could be used more effectively than they are now. So I wanted to focus on that as well. The last area I wanted to focus on is your personnel shortages. I mentioned it earlier. This needs to be viewed as an emergency with capital letters, with strobes coming out of it. I don't see how there's going to be any significant improvement of achievement for kids, especially now, if they don't have qualified teachers who teach them.
Amen.
And again, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but it needs to be said. The next group is a whole bunch of stuff, compliance, there's some transportation issues, we talked about fiscal management, but I want to focus on accountability. Once people understand what the rules are, that goes to guidance. You have training of what, those rules, what that guidance is. There's resources in place. There's training in place. Then it goes to accountability. What we gave you, what else do you want? There needs to be some accountability for moving forward. And I make a distinction between good faith, and everybody needs support when there's a good faith effort, but sometimes there's not such good faith, and that's when accountability really needs to step in. And last, we mentioned an internal project manager that be an internal person. This is hard stuff, and it also, I think I stress, transverses departments and units and divisions, and some of this stuff cannot be resolved at various levels, and it's got to trickle up to the top. And that would be the role of the project manager, to get feedback about the actions that you choose to take. And then that people could go to and say, hey, here's this issue, we need some help, that then can directly work with the superintendent, across the district teams and to the trustees. So that's what that group would be for. Next slide. So we tried to put a matrix in place, and it's not perfect, and the district personnel may, this is somewhat judgmental, but let me just walk you through this, because these areas that I just described, and those are along the top, that we talked about the major areas, MTSS, special referral eligibility, et cetera, that we divided the recommendations into. There's a lot of cross against those areas. So for example, is board of trustee policy that may address several of those areas. The next is areas that need to be addressed by the central office, regional teams, school teams, and involves data review. Almost all of those probably have them. The next group, we call an independent facilitator. We call for a lot, in several areas, for example, around inclusivity, for example, around an MTSS framework. It's going to require some good, good talks across divisions. And we think you need a facilitator in there for those talks. to keep an eye on yeah, are people engaged? Are people controlling the discussion? Somebody without an agenda that keeps their eye on the ball, that could focus the discussions and ensure there's collaborative discussion across all of those divisions. So that's what that means. Many of these areas require an implementation plan that needs to meld together. You might develop some of them in parts, but then you need to see how they all fit together. Written guidance, professional learning, data analysis and reporting, and then again, monitoring and accountability. Again, this is not perfect. Every time I look at it, I might decide to put an X somewhere else, but it just gives you a framework in which to try to organize these various recommendations and their subcomponents. And with that, I believe we go to questions. Next slide.
Yeah, first of all, Madam Chair, I just want to thank you and members of the board for your attention and patience as we've gone through at a very high level, a very long and complicated report. And I also want to thank once again Superintendent Jara for his leadership and courage in asking us to do this report. This is not an easy thing to ask for, but his commitment to improving the education of students in Clark County is abundant, and this is good evidence of his courage and commitment to the students in the school district, and to thank all of his team for working with us and getting us the information that we needed to give you the best possible review. So with that, happy to take any questions or comments that you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Casserly. So first I want to thank you and your team and your organization for giving us a very thorough and transparent report. And I want to thank staff for being open to doing this, because it's very hard to put yourself out there and be vulnerable in this way. And I think sometimes that large districts, they sometimes don't question practices because this is a lot of work. And it is going to take a lot of work for anything positive. So I want to thank everyone involved. And then I want to see if trustees have questions. Trustees?
They may be exhausted after the report.
Maybe they just got so much information that their brains are very, very full right now.
This is Trustee Ford.
Go ahead, Trustee Ford.
I have some questions. I'm still formulating them, so I will volunteer to go last, but I'm also going to be doing the timer. So if the trustees can check the chat so that we can try to keep it to 3 minutes each.
So far, I don't have any other trustees in right now, Trustee Ford. So trustees, do we have any questions?
Hi, this is Chris Garvey.
Go ahead, Trustee Garvey.
So thank you so much. Such a detailed report and a lot of information. And I think for a lot of us, there's a lot of areas where we want to dig down, we want to get more information and try and figure out, okay, so how do we do this? I know in one of the slides, it talked about how our inclusion rate wasn't like the nation's or that. Do you think there's a correlation between our high class sizes and the fact that other states maybe have smaller class sizes, and that is what helps them to have more inclusion, or they have a higher staff to student ratio than we do? Even if it's not teaching staff, it may be student aid, or I mean, teacher aides or that.
Yeah, Trustee Garvey, we didn't do an explicit study on that, but it's hard for me to believe that the two things aren't related in Clark County in Nevada. The temptation when you've got really large class sizes to do whatever you can to reduce those class sizes, which sometimes means separating out students and putting them into into separate settings. So I think your higher class sizes serve as an incentive to isolate students with disabilities more so than it otherwise would be.
Right. And then I want to ask about how we are in comparison to like our rural districts and that, because sometimes in a rural district, you only have so many teachers, so you have to include those children. You don't have the ability or the number of individuals to support separate classes or whatever. Does that play into some of the numbers too?
No.
Yeah, it may. I would defer to Sue here. I don't know if Sue, you've done any studies on what the dynamics in rural schools are, but your hypothesis about the situation in rural schools and how different it is from urban schools makes sense to me, in the sense that the dynamics in urban school districts may be such that it unwittingly encourages the isolation of kids that might not otherwise be isolated and more likely to be taught in a general education class. Hello, Sue.
Yeah, I want to go back to, obviously it's much harder with the barriers that you all have in place, the challenges you have in place. Making a difference is not going to be as easy as if you were a very wealthy district, with lots of personnel and lots of available classes and et cetera, et cetera. But let me say that, even the most important characteristic, I think, because you have what you have, and that's going to be leadership and how your services are configured. So it starts with that, and you have a lot of kids who are transported from the school they would otherwise go to another school, and that's taking money. I would suggest do a study of how much money you're spending on transportation from an individual school where the kids are going out, and what their principal would do if their principal had that money they was spent on wheels, of children being transported out, and see if their principal might not be creative in a way to use those funds differently if the kids would remain, or some of those or most of those kids would remain in that school. So yes, there's these challenges, but I say start with leadership, a will, a vision, and reading everything you can and looking at districts. And there are districts across the country that are urban with big class sizes that educate their kids more inclusively.
Right. And, I just want to be able to start digging into this so that when we start having the conversation at the state level, we can help guide them through why it looks like.
You see, it's locally. What are the people doing locally? It's not about the state level. It's about the federal intent behind those dollars and how they should be supporting the children in the local community. And that's where Ms. Trustee is off task.
We're not doing as much as our rural districts in some areas, where if you dug down deeper, you'd find out maybe the intensity of the needs of some of our IEP students are much greater than the intensity of their IEP students, or the fact that, we have huge class sizes compared to some of our rural.
And it's called maintenance of effort, and every child has a right to make minimal progress in the public education system.
Districts and that. So it's trying to be able to frame that conversation with our legislators, to be able to have that ability to look for more resources once we've started, exhausting what we can do as far as low-hanging fruit by changing what we're doing that doesn't cost money, because there's probably a longer list of things that do cost money than don't.
In addition to that, typically urban school districts have higher proportion of low incidence, more severe disabilities too, because it's the big cities that have the healthcare facilities in them. So sometimes families with children with disabilities will move to the urban areas for additional care. So that will affect the overall pattern of your class sizes and the resources that you need to serve those students.
Great, thank you. And I'll let some of my other trustees take some questions now.
Thank you, Trustee Garvey. Trustee Cavazos?
Thank you, Trustee Brooks. First of all, thank you to Michael Casserly and his team for an incredible job on this. We appreciate the amount of detail and especially appreciate your recommendations. So it's hard to know where to start here, but I'll try. I would have to say that the phrase inclusive instruction framework really hit me hard, because I think that that is something that basically encompasses a lot of the things where we are looking at where we have gaps in many different areas. And as Trustee Garvey brought up, having to do with, you know, our differences between, say, national levels, state levels, and then district levels. Something that I wanted to ask about was, again, talking about the amount of time that our children spend segregated in our district. And again, taking into account the class sizes. Where does the organizational aspect in aligning with our regional leadership and helping them and helping our principals, where do we go from here? I'm kind of puzzled on that, because we had so many different areas where we had that gap. So what have you found to be successful in districts similar to ours as far as aligning with that leadership to help them?
So I would just say, you know, there are sometimes a consultant can really be useful. And I'd say this is one. And we talk about this in the report, because you don't want to build the wheel for Clark County. You really want to take what are the successful models, what are the successful trainings, what have other districts done, and you want to cut the learning curve, if you will. And so if you know, and we can make some suggestions. If you get a consultant who has been around the block, you know, has done this before, has experience, have the skills, they can help, you know, lead you in the right direction. That's my shortcut answer, because that does reduce the learning curve for the district.
Yeah, I'm going to answer your question in a slightly different way, because you mentioned the word alignment, and this is an issue that will require some diligence on the part of the district. But for all intents and purposes, you have an instructional system that's not terribly aligned, because each of your schools is doing something different, and then your organizational structure at your regional.
Wow. Every school in Clark County is doing something different. And it's just like being in different parts of the world. It's like, you know, everybody's doing something different. No accountability, zero accountability. Let's see what the state is going to do.
Level is not necessarily aligned with your schools in a consistent way. So you've got both an organizational and instructional misalignment that is making it more difficult, I suspect, for you to meet your academic goals for not only students with disabilities, but for general education as well.
Thank you, Mr. Casserly and Ms. Gale. I appreciate that. I guess that would tie in with my next question, where you have pointed out that basically, you know, again, with the decentralization, our lack of our core curriculum. And I think that this is something that, again, our district is not the only one struggling with this, but the lack of consistency. I hear from our SPED teachers all the time. I have many friends in the district that struggle with this, and they're receiving different directional guidance, shall we say, and then they go back and try to.
Okay, now I'm confused. Does she not know that she's a board member? Does she not know the guidance comes from the board? I'm confused. Where are they getting the different directional guidance?
Just for lack of a better word, align with their students' needs. So when we look at professional development, again, I think it was Ms. Gam who spoke about this, having to do with the cross-training. We need more people who know more. And when there's a lack of communication and a lack of collaboration among the departments, it's the kids, it's our personnel without enough training and resources that suffer. So I would be interested in delving a little bit deeper, looking at, you provided a lot of details, and I will admit, in trying to read the entire report, that there were some parts, and I'm a fast reader, that I did skim, so I do want to go back and review that. I do thank you for the detail. Something that I would want to look at as a trustee is I would want to go back and look at the last several budgets and see in our curriculum development with special ed and especially with ELL, looking at the disproportionality with our African-American students, with our American Indian students, with our Latino students, wanting to look at what kind of training are our teachers, what kind of training are they receiving? And I did just get my very quick notice that my time is almost up. Thank you, Trustee Ford. So I'll just end up saying that I think that the cross-training is very valuable. Thank you so much for your work.
So if I could put a pin in something that Trustee Cavazos said, and that is the importance of a system system that sets out a standard set of understandings about what students are to know and at what level of depth are they to know it. If that's not in place because each of the individual schools has latitude to define standards and expectations academically on their own, then
yeah, that's some insane stuff,
you
right?
really do have a very difficult time moving the system forward in any single direction.
Everybody has.
Thank you, Mr. Casserly. I appreciate that and the extra elaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Cavazos. Trustee Ford?
Thank you. Okay, I have a few questions. Let me start my timer. I just want to reiterate the class size questions, and then also I'm asking that because many times during the presentation we were compared to the state, the nation. So do we have any data around where we are compared to, what we're being compared to in other areas? Also, what about, we just don't have a lot of aides, how does that compare with the rest of the state, the rest of the country, and also parent involvement and parent.
This is just about how allocation and resources are allocated to the different school sites, and she's asking about parent involvement.
And education. I feel like one of the things that we struggle with is communication to parents and how they can best support their students. So how do we compare on that level with other districts in Nevada, other large urban districts, and the rest of the country? That's my first question.
Right, that's kind of a multi-part question. On the issue of staffing, it was very clear to us that your staffing was low in a lot of special education personnel areas compared to other big city school districts across the country. And we give you that data in the report of staffing level by staffing level and for both teachers and related services personnel and the like. But this goes back to your funding picture, where the district has been so badly funded over the years that it's taken a toll on your staffing levels and your ability to retain good staff. So Sue, do you want to take up other parts of the question, maybe on parent and community?
For class size, let me just say, we've been in other districts with very large class sizes. I mean, it is what it is. I would just urge you, to do what you can going forward. And because I do think that there are ways you could work with what you have, but, configuring differently, if that's all you can work with. And I would just stress again, to the extent that kids are in separate classes, a lot of these kids are the ones with no teacher that's qualified. So, you have to keep it in the back of your mind in order to push yourself forward to address, some of these obstacles. In terms of parent involvement, we've been in several districts that have very active parent advisory groups. And I think in our report, we gave several recommendations. It's going to take recruitment. It's going to take outreach. It's going to, working with them to.
Okay, so let's really talk about what Nevada does. Nevada partnered with the organization called FACES. And there are two women who are Caucasian who just came up with an idea about parent involvement. And then suddenly they have an office at the district office. And they are doing the parent involvement for all people. But it's just unfortunate that Black people don't participate. Let's listen.
Determine, do they want their own organization to support them to do that, or how would they like to be organized? But obviously reaching out to them through community social media or the television, however, creative ways you could do that with stakeholder groups that exist, the better off everyone would be.
Thank you. My next questions are, we talk a lot about recruiting and retainment of teachers. We are short special ed teachers, we all know that. So I guess this is a partial question for Superintendent Jara as well. What do you suggest / what is Jara intending to do to recruit specifically special ed teachers? Also, our current structure does.
I just want to know the current structure. How do you organize your resources to ensure that you're targeting the needy children?
Provide enough special ed training, which has already been brought up. But my question is, who is ultimately responsible for that when
it's you.
Is that the board? Is that the superintendent?
Yes, it's the board. No.
And how do we plan to address this and get proper professional development for all of our teachers?
Yes, let's hear. This is interesting. Secrets are not
Trustee
responsible.
Board, is your question about responsibility for Dr. Casserly, or is that for Superintendent Jara?
Well, I guess my question is first for Mr. Casserly, because there's a lot of, in the report, it talks about the board's responsibility / what we can do to help. And then also, we can't get into the operations much. So I guess my question is just to clarify, who is accountable? Is it us or is it Jara? Because then that changes, I guess our involvement. And then also, how are we planning to address providing our teachers with better and adequate professional development?
Okay, so I will have Dr. Casserly start with that question, and then maybe Superintendent Jara can catch the tail end of that.
Well, everybody has responsibility in different ways. I mean, the board has responsibility for
isn't that true?
ensuring that the policies for things like inclusion are there. Obviously, the administration under the superintendent's aegis has a responsibility for the overall operation of the school district, and regional superintendents and principals have responsibility as well. I think one of the things that was clear to us, and by the way, the state legislature has responsibility for some of this as well. But one of the things that I think we pointed out in the report is that it didn't look like, if you looked at how the system operated, that anybody was explicitly responsible for the overall academic well-being of students with disabilities. I mean, nobody was held explicitly accountable for how those students were progressing.
I'm sorry, but it's the board's responsibility to ensure that they're measuring progress and access for all children. I don't know how you eliminate the governing board, because it's the governing board that's approving all those decisions as to how they're spending the money. I am just totally confused now.
And I think that was our bigger concern about accountability was sometimes when you say everybody's responsible, but you can't find how anybody is responsible any place in the system, then it raises a bigger question for you about whether or not the system can more carefully articulate at each one of the levels, the board, the superintendent, the regional superintendents, and the principals, what their responsibility is actually for, and then ensure that at least a portion of their evaluation is based on that.
And yeah, no, thank you, Madam President, members of the board, and I can just close. Obviously, the responsibility of the implementation of the recommendations will be up to obviously the superintendent and the special ed under the deputy superintendent, and the accountability to provide high quality professional development for all educators, which is part of what we talked about here in this report to improve student outcomes. That is part of my responsibility within the team. Now, the other thing on the hiring is also critical, obviously, as we've had obviously the teacher vacancies that we've had in the district. It's up to the head of HR under my leadership to make sure that we expand on some of the offerings and recruitment strategies to bring in more special ed educators into our buildings.
Thank you, Superintendent Jarrett. Steve Ford, you have 30 seconds left, so if you have another question, you can go ahead and ask it.
I had 50 seconds on my timer, but all right. I just wanted to ask again, what is the board's role in supporting a multi-tiered support system? Because I think that I really like all the recommendations around that. And then I wanted to ask, you mentioned the special ed teachers that you had talked to in November when you were doing this, when you were getting the data. How did the special ed teachers get selected? What was that process, and how many were there?
So Julie, you might be able to answer that.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, Trustee Ford, in the document we include like the teachers that were included in the process, but it's very important when we ask for it to be a random sample of schools and whatnot, so that it's not, that it's delineated trying to be very equitable across the district. So it's something we pay very close attention to, and it's something that I work on.
I know that it was in California, I think in the early 90s, that they were moving towards more fuller inclusion classes, bringing more children who had disabilities into regular ed. I don't see any effort to bring children into regular ed and hold themselves accountable for all children learning.
Come together with the school district when we're doing. So it's a good question, and it's definitely something that we pay attention to. And
Thank you. Who gave that recommendation?
Who gave that recommendation? We actually, I explained to the staff and how it needed to be a random sample, like via the school. So I was working with Deanna Czerkowski in that process.
Okay.
So, and on your other question about multi-tiered systems of support, if you like, we can provide the board with some sample MTSS policies at the board level, if you like.
That would be great. I have a lot of notes from NASB when we were in November, actually, when I took a class on that. So I would love to look at that and pair it with what I have learned about Nevada specifically.
And I would just add, Dr. Casserly, for Trustee Ford, there's tons of recommendations on the MTS and the framework in the report, and a lot of follow-up to kind of how that be developed via the board and the superintendent in the district.
Great, thank you.
And can I add, Trustee Brooks, MTSS has been part of Focus 2024 since it was adopted by the board. So that there is, and these are some of the things.
Okay, so multi-tiered systems of services has been a part of the board. But guess what? They don't have any data around that area. It's a multi-tiered system. They need to target how they're accessing the children. I don't hear it.
We've already started to work on as a school system as well.
Thank you, Superintendent. Okay. Thank you, Trustee Ford. Trustee Wright?
Hi.
Go ahead.
Thanks. So Dr. Casserly and your team, I want to thank you. This is quite a deep dive and a lot of work went into this. It seems like, though, everything kind of funnels back to, as you put it, the unusually weak funding from the state. So I'd like to sort of go back, if you could, to the finances and a little bit of the decentralization issues. Could you reiterate, because it wasn't on the slide, which I was just a tiny bit disappointed, but could you reiterate a little bit about the other urban school districts and what you've seen with decentralization and the autonomy and the disjointing with the misalignment of the curriculum and things like that, and then maybe some ideas on how we can work with our legislators to improve AB 469 so we can get things back on track?
Well, a number of items that we try to stress are in the slides right behind the title, Context Matters. And we laid out some of the funding disparities between Clark County and other urban school districts across the country. We could obviously be a lot more detailed about it, but funding for the Clark County school system per student is well below not only other big city school districts, but below national averages as well. And you're one of the least well-funded urban school districts in the country. So you were also asking about the legislation, AB, I forget the number now.
469.
469, yeah. So this is something that the superintendent and his team has been working on in terms of articulating a uniform set of standards and expectations for instruction across the school district. So we really applaud that work, but the system's interpretation of that legislation historically has resulted in the decentralization of the instructional program almost school by school. And it's that dynamic that has essentially fractured the instructional program and its coherence across the system and made it difficult to gain any academic momentum behind the work that the school district has been able to realize historically. So again, I've never seen a big city school district where every school in the system is able to define its instructional program and see it add up to movement across an entire system. I've never seen it. And that's because people are going in too many different directions simultaneously. They have too disparate an understanding of what is supposed to be taught, at what level of depth, at what point, how it's to be augmented, supplemented, and what the nature of the interventions ought to be once students start to slip behind. So without any of that definition, like is typically provided in an MTSS system, you get a school system where it's very, very hard to move forward academically. In contrast, if you look at big city school districts across the country who have made unusual academic progress, you will see a greater sense of coherence and definition and alignment in the instructional program, and the capacity building that goes along with it, the interventions that accompany it, and the like. So historically, what Clark County has done has not been consistent with what you see in the faster improving big city school districts.
And thank you. I appreciate your elaborating on a little bit of what you said earlier. And you know, it unfortunately does come down to money to be able to provide better pay so that we have more teachers, so that we can provide for more professional development, better professional development, lower class sizes, you know, more special ed aides, you know, all these things, you know, take some money. And when you look at our budget, we do provide significant funding from our general ed, and I'm not saying we shouldn't, but you know, we already are underfunded federally and from the state when it comes to special education, and then overall underfunded. And now we're again looking at more budget cuts. My 11 plus years on the board, we have seen significant budget cuts time after time after time. And I think until the state realizes that we cannot continue to cut education and get better results, you know, we're just gonna, we're gonna continue to flounder as an education system. So Dr. Casserly, sorry, almost called you by your first name there.
Mike is fine. My first name is not doctor.
I appreciate all the work, and I hope that you will continue to help us if we have additional questions as time goes on.
Of course, happy to help.
Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Wright. Trustee Young?
I'll put my picture, I'll put myself back in. Okay, so first of all, thank you all. Dr. Casserly, I've known you for a lot of years, and you have always been stellar in what you do. You've always worked very hard to speak to the needs of the members of the Council of Great City Schools. And so I appreciate that, and I appreciate your team you brought down. They were awesome, and the data speaks volumes. So I have no problems with any of the data. I just want to kind of cut to the chase from what I see here. And the data is right there, but the teacher morale, and every year I would go around all 60 of my schools. Can't this year because of COVID-19, but the teacher morale in special education and the teacher aides and the staff was just at the bottom. And yes, some of it is money. It definitely is. But what I found more to be the problem was that they did not feel, if you go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, just going to the whole physiological aspect and safety and love and belonging and esteem and self-actualization, not only for staff but for students. It's a morale issue. I had so many teachers that were talking about leaving the profession.
Because they're not making any progress and the children aren't learning.
They felt disrespected, not so much about the Clark County School District, but just in general. And we've got to get to the crux of the physiological and just the basic needs of people. Then we can probably move to some of these other areas. But the passion that I'm just talking to, I just talked to a teacher the other day that came to do a videotaping for me for one of the magnet school programs. And we just had a conversation before she went back to her school. And I was asking her, how are you doing? How are things going? And then she would tell me how much she appreciated where she was. And if it wasn't for this principal, she would have walked away from the school district. And she's a good teacher, but she said she felt dehumanized and put down. In some kind of way, we've got to give back our teachers the joy of teaching that they're valued and respected, not only teachers, but our support staff, our bus drivers, our cafeteria workers. And so I just want to put that down. What do you recommend that we can get that whole mission, kind of like a mission of being, it's my vision, it's my mission, this is my calling to be a teacher. It's kind of evaporated somewhere. And we can get the training. We can eventually get the training. And eventually it is money, but it's not all money. There's a whole crux here of issues that are just emotionally attacking the staff and the students.
Dr. Young, just letting you know, the 3 minutes that we kind of agreed on is like right there.
Okay, all right. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there. I don't know if you guys can respond to that or not, but I think we have to get to that before we can get to anything else.
So I just, if it's okay, I just wanted to mention, I'm really glad, Trustee Young, you mentioned that, because as people were talking, I'm thinking about retention. Because one of the major factors that feeds into shortages is the revolving door. And as important as it is to recruit, it's maybe even more important to retain. And that goes to some of the issues that you're talking about. So we talk about listening to the voice of youth. I think it's important to listen to the voice of teach personnel and to hear what their issues are. And you might not be able to solve issues, but boy, people just want to be heard.
That's all.
And to know that you're working on these issues and you recognize these issues and you're really, and to bring them into, okay, how do we address this? We know we don't have a bottomless pocketbook, but with what we have, what are some of your ideas? Work with us on teams and really work on their retention issue, especially now. It's, it can be tough.
Okay, well, I've gone over my time. If we can get to that, we can get to the others. I think it starts at the basic, at the bottom. And that's a big one. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Well said.
If you want to add yourself to the queue, you can go after Trustee Cavazos. Trustee Cavazos?
Okay.
Thank you, Trustee Brooks. I just wanted to circle back with something very brief. Thank you for addressing the issue of consistency and coherence. Extremely important in all factors of this report. I guess I want to address the funding issue, which is, of course, always there. We all agree on that. I do have to agree with Trustee Young that we can ask for more money. We need more money. Everybody, nobody disagrees with that. But we need to also have some accountability on what we're going to do with that money, how we're going to structure it. And I wonder if, I know I may have missed this in the report, but when we're talking about an independent consultant, have the school districts that you've seen with a lot of improvement basically worked with the independent consultant, but there was a team that also was structured to work with this consultant.
You want me to address that? I mean,
So
right. Right. We're really talking about a facilitator, somebody who's coming in with that knowledge base. It's definitely, it's not preaching, but is working with a group of people to help facilitate that process. Again, adding that knowledge base, so, and models and materials from other sources, so you're not starting with a blank piece of paper. But absolutely, you do not want to give the impression that we're talking about somebody coming in and, giving you the Bible. It's really working with a group of people. And I have not seen a consultant being successful when that stakeholder approach and collaboration is not in place. Everybody's then frustrated, and the consultant's like, I'm done here because it's not working.
Yeah, and I would want to add, Trustee Cavazos, that it's really, we've seen it work well. Their senior leadership definitely at Clark County is able, and Dr. Larson Mitchell, Dr. Casserly, they're very ready and able to do this work. I think what Sue's really talking about, facilitating across collaborations and also via the regions and the schools and really working together. And a lot of that, as well as Trustee Ford was raising with the MTSS system, a lot of that, is done as well with that type of process. So you're looking at somebody who has, even greater depth and expertise that may be able to just to help to formulate things even quicker.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm very happy to hear that, because I do believe that, Deanna Jaskowski and her staff, all of our teachers, our subs, our support staff, as you said, we want to get more answers, more collaboration, more training, so we're not having to constantly go up the ladder, but that we have the experts, the ones who are, I believe you used one of my favorite terms there, one of you, in the trenches. I do like that term. But the ones that are in the trenches, they are our experts, our school organizational teams. Until we really start listening to our teachers, our assistants, our teaching aides, we don't have enough of them. All of them are doing their absolute best right now, but we need to listen to them as much as possible as we try to reconfigure and address the gaps that we have. So again, of course we have a funding deficit, but we need to be able to show what we're going to do with that and how that's going to be structured. And I believe the staff that we have right now are doing their best with what they have. So thank you again for your answers. I appreciate your elaboration.
Thank you, Tia.
Okay. Are you able to hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Okay. I just want to go back just to a couple things, and funding and getting our schools on board. I can't tell you enough how concerned many of the people in the community and certainly in the schools are about not being able to help the students the way they want to. They're a little bit depressed, a little bit down about it, and feeling like at one point they have missed the mark. So my chance, or my comment here is working with what we have with our people, trying to lift them up. It's kind of like we talk about the nurses and the doctors with COVID-19, and I don't want to talk too much about it because I'll run out of time. They're on the front line. They are the warriors. They are the people that are really trying to make things happen. In some kind of way, they need an applause. They need to be acknowledged. They need to be put, instead of bringing in these consultants. I appreciate all of you all, but you've got some teachers out there that are just stars, but they never get recognized. So they want to help the students. The students need our help. I think we need to build in your proposals relationships. How do we make relationships work, and how do we help the teachers to get the relationships with the students and the students with the parent? The whole thing is, I think, starts with relationships and building on that, so that then there's the confidence and trust as we continue to go. I got 30 seconds. So let me just wrap up my comments here. I just want, where we are is to get back the passion, to retain our teachers, to let them know they're valued and appreciated and respected, and that we can build trust from us as trustees to the school programs and to their teachers and to our students. If we aren't working together and people don't believe in us, and we don't practice inclusion and respect and value one another, how do we teach that to others in our school district? That's important. Thanks.
Amen.
That's all the questions I have, but before I turn it over to Superintendent Jar, I have a couple questions, comments. I think one of the things that has always bothered me about education in Nevada is how many things that we put on top of a shaky ground. So I think that because we don't focus on good quality tier 1 instruction and consistent expectations and aligned curriculum, I think these are the basics that a lot of districts have, and we wind up spending a lot of money on interventions on top of a lot of deficits. So do you see that strategy utilized in other districts, or do they focus primarily on tier 1 instruction?
We do see the overuse of the intervention in way too many school districts, and it never works.
Okay. And then we talked a lot about decentralization and the lack of universal expectations. Have you ever seen an urban district decentralized to this level where they were able to shift it back to a more positive?
So she's talking about decentralization. She's saying the services are not coming from the district office, the services coming from the school sites, but there's no way to measure the maintenance of effort because they don't have the data.
Direction, and if so, who is that district, and can we get their number?
This may surprise Sue since she used to work there, but Chicago is one of those school districts that at one point had a radically decentralized school system, and you saw the system really going nowhere academically until they ultimately embraced the standards, built a coherent instructional system around those standards, put a lot of emphasis on the training of principal supervisors and principals around instructional leadership, and then built their professional development inside of their schools around instruction. And that school district, while not the highest performing school district in the nation, but one of the faster improving school districts across the country. So it can be done. School systems can pivot in this way. Miami would be another one. Dallas would be another one. So these are all good-sized school districts that are comparable in size to Clark County, who once had very decentralized school districts that moved to a more coherent definition of what it is they wanted academically, and you saw them make substantial progress.
Have you ever seen decentralization in the same manner, or is it organized differently where they don't have school organizational teams?
There's almost no end to the variations in decentralization. Yeah, there's lots of different variants in how it is you can do that, if that's what you're asking. Yes,
if there was like a common definition of decentralization.
No, there's really not. Clark County is probably as decentralized a school district as there ever was. Maybe Detroit at one point, or Seattle at one point. Detroit, while still extremely low achieving, is now it's kind of standardized its instructional approach, and you're now seeing that school district starting to move academically. So there's another example. Detroit isn't always a good example of all kinds of things, but it's another example of what was once a pretty radically decentralized system that wasn't making any headway, but now is starting to show progress.
Thank you, Dr. Casserly. So I'm gonna have Trustee Ford. She has a question, and then Dr. Jara, Superintendent Jara, is going to close us out. Trustee Ford?
She may be on mute.
Trustee Ford? Okay, Superintendent Jara, you want to close us out?
I do. I just want to, first of all, just thank Dr. Casserly, the Council of Great City Schools, Sue, Julie. Thank you for your work and our team as well. But also, I want to go back and just really congratulate our educators, because if you go back to the data on NAEP, there are things that are moving in the direction. You heard a lot of things of lack of funding. Our educators across the district are doing really great work with limited funding. So I just wanted to thank all principals, teachers, all our staff. They're taking care of our kids, doing some work with very limited funding. We are making gains in our NAEP scores in 4th grade, so we have a good foundation to move forward. I just wanted to make sure that it doesn't go unnoticed from my team and from the board as well for our hardworking educators around schools. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Casserly and your team. We appreciate the thoroughness of your report. We commit to definitely reading it all, and we will reach out to you if we have additional questions.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the board. Thank you, Mr. Superintendent and Julie and Sue. Thank you.
Good night, all.
Thank you.
Superintendent Jara, are there other staff members that need to join us for the next one?
I do have some staff that they're already on. I know Mike Delprado is on, but we can move to the next agenda item at your pleasure, Madam Chair.
All right, we are going to move on to agenda item 5.2, Human Capital Management System Updates. And I am going to turn it over to you, Superintendent Jara.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. This is an update for our HCM system. If you recall, a while ago, we brought in Mike Delprado, and he is on the line already, has been listening. He is somebody that we brought in for, I think his expertise is on what we call a recovery expert, to go back and look at systems, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Mike Casey is here, and so is Mike Delprado. So our Chief Operations Officer will do the introduction. Thank you.
Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Jara, can you hear me okay?
We can.
So tonight, Mike Casey for the record. So tonight we bring before you an update on the HCM system. As covered in previous presentations, the development, configuration, and implementation of the HCM occurred over a 2-year period. As of January of this year, we did go live shortly after we encountered a number of issues. Immediately following that discovery, the internal team, as well as our implementation partners, got to work trying to address those issues. While progress was made, as a result of that, we didn't really have a clear picture in terms of a timeline and some of the transparency that we would have liked for those issues. So at that time, we engaged Mr. Delprado, executive option. Among other services his firm provides, he specializes in implementation recovery. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Delprado to discuss some of the findings he found as far as working with us and our implementation partners, as well as the work he's done thus far in the road forward. With that, go ahead, Mike.
Are you there, Mr. Delprado?
Madam President, let me just check to see if he's hopped back on the call. I know he did drop off during the last presentation.
I can't hear him, trustees.
Yes, Superintendent Jar, we're waiting for the presentation to be displayed on the screen.
Mr. Del Prado, can you,
Yeah.
okay.
Hello, everybody. I jumped on the phone because it seemed like I had audio problems on the computer. Can you guys hear me now?
We can hear you. You know,
Perfect. Yeah, apologies for the mishap. Okay, so, I'm sorry?
go ahead. I think we're ready.
Okay, perfect. Apologize for the delay here. Quick intro. I did hear the intro, so I've been engaged to head the project remediation efforts and help straighten the ship. I have over 25 years experience in end-to-end enterprise implementations as well as critical project recovery. With that said, the first task that I usually do is a deep dive assessment, interviewing with stakeholders, the impacted parties, review project collateral as i.e. the statement of work, the project plan, all the change management metrics, and then I conclude with what are my findings and then what steps I need to take. So with that said, I'm going to go to, if we can go to the first slide, well, outside of the, on findings. So the key findings, there were many more, but the key findings that definitely impacted the project was number one, system went live with critical functional gaps still open. In most cases, when the project is about to go live, there is a go, no-go meeting that includes 100% of the stakeholders. And it articulates key components, open items, which in many projects there could be open items, associated risk and impact, stabilization and remediation plan associated to these open items. And then one key component is the implementing partners' assessment of the project readiness for go live. Those are all key factors for them, the stakeholders, to make a determination whether we are ready to go live or not. So there were some missing elements there, and there were several key open items that one would say we shouldn't be operational, we shouldn't be ready with the system. So that's one. The other one was limited cross-functional end-to-end testing prior to go live. So and I've heard on the previous board meetings that there was end-to-end testing, and that is correct. There was end-to-end testing performed, but it was limited in cross-functional collaboration. And what I mean by that, in an HCM payroll implementation, you do a recruit to retire process, and their dependencies are within the HCM payroll and accounting platform. That was not fully done end-to-end. So in that case, in that instance, you run into upstream and downstream impact points that could have potentially caused these payroll issues that we ran into after we went live. Another finding was fragmented collaboration between the implementing partner and CCSD operations. So due to day-to-day operational priorities, continuous collaboration was not always possible. So this should have been presented as a high.
He's saying that they didn't want to work together. That's what he's saying.
High priority risk during the steering committees, the recurring steering committees, and also should have been a determining factor of our project go, no go. In that case, if I'm in a project and I have a threshold of accountable party participation, if that threshold is met, at that point in time I escalate and then I recommend that we hold the project. So I believe that was not necessarily met to the best practice expectations. Limited change in transition management. So the framework was there, but it wasn't executed, or it was executed in a limited fashion. So change management encompasses the full structure of a project, from project vision, planning, realization, and transition. And most importantly, it includes testing and quality gates. The transition part of it, transition management part of it, is the continued, from inception to completion, the continued communication to assure full participation of the project and the product.
Okay, so he doesn't have any data. He's not presenting any data. He's just telling you the process that he used. But he don't have any data on how the transition and how the support was supposed to happen. You don't have any numbers at all. You can't do a presentation without data.
Very detailed and dedicated requirements gathering, end-to-end stakeholder engagement, training, knowledge transfer, and ultimately client acceptance. So like I said, that framework did exist. It seems like there was some limitations there, and that's where we ran into some issues. But all this resulted in lack of confidence in the use of the system. If we can go to the next slide.
And all that resulted in lack of confidence.
So what has been accomplished so far? And like I said, I'm only demonstrating highlights because I wanted to present a short slide deck. So one of the key ones is we aligned with Cherry Road on the gap and approach to remediate the issue. They were very accommodating, given the circumstances, and we negotiated. Our negotiations resulted in a recovery of over $700,000 in form of continued support credits from Cherry Road. This is in addition to the committed remediation work to stabilize the system. So this was an added complement. We also implemented a robust change management process for the remediation items. To date, there's over 80% of the remediation items have been completed and submitted for testing. Now, submitted for testing meaning that we are still waiting for feedback from the stakeholders to make sure that the remediations are, in fact, correct, in production and working properly as well. We forecast about 95% of the remediation items to be completely tested and operational by the end of this month. Another point is the amplified support presence during payroll cycles to increase payroll integrity. So Cherry Road recognized that part of the remediation and the stabilization of the system was the back-end support to assure that our payroll cycles are getting healthier per cycle. So we have that presence as well. Increased cross-functional collaboration and visibility of all open issues related to HR, payroll, and finance. We have semi-weekly multi-departmental collaboration sessions to review all open issues. So this supports in ensuring that all downstream and upstream impact points are considered during a change. So it's not enough that a single department like HR or payroll might find an issue that needs to be corrected. We want to account for how that impacts the other processes as well. So that's going on as we speak. We've also enlisted solution architects to resolve and deliver on complex requirements. So we brought on senior level dedicated resources to increase the momentum of the priority issues. If we can go to the next slide, next slide, please. So here's an example of the resource complement that we added. We brought on a senior level solution architect with several years of experience, supporting if anything, adding momentum to the delivery process. And this is in no way an indictment on Cherry Road and their capabilities, more than a compliment to move the process along and get us where we need to get. We can go to the next slide, please. So what's on the road ahead? The ultimate goal of any project is transitioning from a project model to an operational support model. So once the system is stabilized, payroll is running independently of external support, and operations team is confident in using the system, this is the time where we'll transition to a support model. This means that we will roll off full project presence and have dedicated management services from within the tier level that we agree on. So we're not there yet, but we are trending towards that. There's still work to be done for sure. And as we remediate certain issues, we want to make sure that we are also educating the team on the new processes or whatever has been corrected, and that we make a determination on where we're at and how healthy are we to be able to transition to a support model. Cherry Road is also currently providing a full suite of knowledge transfer sessions to acclimate CCSD operations. As we speak, and as of about 2 weeks ago, we've been having multiple sessions per week, allowing the CCSD team to continue their cultivation and acclimation in the system, get the confidence up, and make sure that we are not missing a step in assuring that we have a full employee employee representation and payroll integrity. And continued operational support, that's a given. So aside from the remediation items, there are several support issues in the queue that require attention that are getting their due attention and getting resolved. The road ahead as well includes continued oversight and control. This is what I do. This is what I've been doing for many years. I want to make sure that I am overseeing the process and adding an element of control so we don't run into a wall down the line. So that's part of my service and support as well. Amplified presence during critical cycles. So this is a partnership with our implementing partner, CCSD support, on making sure that there is a level of confidence and support during these cycles like payroll, W-2, year-end, to assure that there is accuracy, integrity in the process. So with that said, does anybody have any questions?
Thank you. Trustees, questions? I'm sure there will be questions, so let's see who would like to go first. I don't see anyone sign up, so I will take a stab at it.
Sure.
I know in the past we were presented with information about this launch, and it was overly optimistic, and it was there were no problems from staff's point of view prior to launch. And I know we talked in our briefing about running a parallel system. So can you explain why that wasn't successful and why we weren't able to find those issues during that process?
Oh, for sure, I'm happy to answer that. So from my understanding, our legacy process, pre-implementation, there was a lot of manual process and disparate, in the disparate systems as well to maintain the overall operation. It was a very manual heavy process. Now that does not take away from the need for us to run a parallel. A full end-to-end payroll cycle would be definitely taxing on the payroll team, but it's worthwhile because it reduces the risk of what we ran into, in this implementation. I can't say if it was done, if the result came out to a $0 variance, but I can say that there was some level of performance of that. So that's part of my analysis after the fact. My primary objective to date is making sure that our go-forward payroll cycles are healthy. Once we are in a steady state, I think that's something that I will need to do a deeper analysis and root cause on.
Thank you. I have some other trustees in the queue, so I just want to make an ask that I know our focus right now is making sure that we get the system up and running 100%. That is our priority, making sure our staff's paid. But I think we also need to look backwards to see where some.
This has to do with where the teachers are placed and the money aligned at the different school sites and how resources are allocated and the outcomes.
Where those critical failures were in the organization so that they can be addressed, so that we can make sure that we are more forward thinking in the future, and also just to make sure that we're more forward thinking.
No, that's a perfect statement, and I appreciate that. And but what we call is a lessons learned process. So after every project, we sit down and identify those gaps or issues or optimized processes that we've done. We use those lessons learned for future projects to make sure we don't run into it, or we use key processes that we learned that are very beneficial for us. So you're absolutely right. That's a given. That would be the next step.
Great, thank you. Trustee Cavazos?
Thank you, Trustee Brooks. Thank you, Mr. Del Prado. And part of my question was answered just a moment ago with Trustee Brooks' question. So I have just a really quick two-part one. In our briefing, you were talking about the go, no-go meeting or the cadence meeting. Can you elaborate on that a little bit for the public and what that consists of and how that's usually structured, and also what the intent of the go, no-go meeting is for? Please.
Yeah, this is definitely a come to terms meeting. This is the last meeting that we have prior to making a decision, or actually resulting in the decision of a go or no go. Meaning that, do we go live with the system, or are there issues that we need to attend to prior to going live? It's a hard conversation to have, especially if there's critical gaps, because there's cost and time involved. And in some instances, we as customers to implementers that do this day in and day out have a high confidence in the suggestion that's provided to us, right? So my assumption is that not every stakeholder was involved in the sessions, whether they maybe transition out of their position or just weren't available. You know, the assessment was not necessarily in line with the actual framework and scenario of the system that required some more work to be performed. And it could have been just a matter of maybe, you know, the will and need to go live and show a success sooner than later, because January go live is very, you know, it looks very good on the calendar. But the things that we look at is the open items, the risk to those items, the impact on those open items, what do we need to do to correct said open items, what is the timeline behind that, and when do we expect to reach full stabilization and handoff. I don't know if they went to that granular detail, but I know that there was a meeting performed. But like I said, for my analysis, it seemed like not all stakeholders were available for that.
Thank you, Mr. Del Prado, for that very thorough explanation. I hope.
Did he say not all stakeholders were available, or did he mean that they didn't reach out to all stakeholders? I think that's what more or less. All stakeholders' voices were not heard.
See, Ford, you're not counting Mr. Del Prado's comments as part of my time. I just want to make sure. I appreciate you explaining that, because as you mentioned and Trustee Brooks mentioned, kind of lessons learned, and in this particular context with a number of employees that were drastically affected by the failure of this system and with their lack of being paid, I think that this is something we need to do. Second part of my question, very short. Can you just kind of briefly address the factor having to do with Taleo and how that's being corrected, please?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, there were several issues in relation to Taleo, be it from the integration of limited functionality that was originally presented to CCSD. Taleo is definitely a tricky feature. I've implemented it several times, in many cases, the out-of-the-box functionality is what's presented to them and saying that's the limitations of the system. This is the reason why we brought in an expert, where they have seen and have experience in expanding said limitations. So the person we brought in has been definitely a added value and benefit to the expansion of its functionality, and we are in progress on that. So several of the open issues that we are tackling today are related to that, and we're seeing success in that.
Thank you, Mr. Del Prado. I'm going to go ahead and let other trustees go forth, and I thank you for those explanations. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
No worries. Thank you.
Trustee Ford? Trustee Ford, are you there? I can come back to you. Trustee Wright?
Thank you. And I really appreciated the honesty that Mr. Del Prado gave when we had our briefing. He was very forthright. I think that he was very open and honest with his answers. And so I'd like to see, not that he hasn't been in this as well, but you know, there was a lot of questions asked. So could you talk or elaborate a little bit more about, we talked a little bit about the confidence level that CCSD had and the information they were getting from Cherry Road, and how that kind of maybe gave us a little bit of false sense of security in some of what was going on. Can you talk a little bit more about that, Mr. Del Prado?
To the best of my abilities, I will. Obviously, I wasn't there, but based on my assessment and analysis, it seemed like, you know, and let me backtrack. So, in the beginning of a project, as we're defining the scope, we're creating a project charter, and within that project charter, there is a list of our stakeholders and key assumptions on what these stakeholders are expected to do, and also direct commitment to what the implementer is going to do. And in that, if I was to take roll call from the project charter, my assumption based on the document that I reviewed would be that not every stakeholder was available, or there was transition, you know, of responsibilities, probably not 100% properly, and an assumption that testing was done appropriately based on the instruction that was provided as by our implementer. Again, I'm not knocking the implementer. This is, you know, they followed a process, defined process that's worked for them in the past. It's about the execution, about the commitment, and also about the accountability on both sides that need to be taking place. So during the go no go meeting, you know, I say this, I say we because, you know, I sit in the same seat as all my clients do, and take their mental assessment. Is we heavily rely on the suggestion provided by the professionals we hire. So if we're, you know, our implementing partner says they are comfortable with the delivered system, and we are go live ready, we tend to lean towards their judgment and assessment, especially when you know, a cross-functional end-to-end testing wasn't performed. So we are limited to our understanding. We are satisfied with our sub-process and the testing associated to it. But we've never seen end-to-end. You know, we've never seen what our successful process, how it impacts accounting, or how it impacts HR, or how it impacts payroll. So with that said, our limited understanding of the system and the process and the suggestion provided to us by our implementing partner, you know, led us to, you know, sign off and saying, well, if they're saying we're ready, let's do this. And that's usually the case. And the reason I speak that way is because, you know, I've been doing this long enough where, you know, I kind of pick up on the telltale signs. So that, I mean, that's my answer, a little bit long-winded, but you know, hopefully that adds some clarity.
That's sort of what I was looking for, yes. And then also, you sort of alluded to it in that answer, but can you talk about that this is not just a payroll department, that there's multiple departments that are that touch this implementation. So can you talk just a little bit more about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's you know, every system, especially you know, HR and payroll are cross-functional. It starts with the user. It starts with the employee. User experience, right? Now there's a dependency on the user to do something on their behalf. You know, from like I mentioned, recruiting, leveraging Taleo in the system, that's one process group. To hiring, that's HR, right? To then transferring, getting married, getting divorced, you know, having children. All these elements are processes that should be tested, and each one of these have a dependency on another platform, whether it be payroll, whether it be accounting. Because if I get married and and have 5 children, that translates to how my payroll is going to treat my payment, and how my benefits and deductions are going to be treated. So, yeah, you know, it's very detailed and articulate, and you have to follow the process. And I know somebody had mentioned the parallel testing as well, and sometimes in those scenarios we want to do that. We want to see how our legacy system reacted. We also want to recognize the gaps from our legacy system. We didn't decide to implement a new system just out of the blue. We found deficiencies, and there's opportunity in a new system and a new implementation. So we want to make sure that we're also accounting for those gaps and variances and manually adjusting the expectations of what the results are going to be. So that, I mean, it's a very complex component when we say cross-functional, but that is a key expectation for any implementation.
Okay. And then I guess my last one is, well, I guess, yeah, I'm going to let my other trustees jump in. Thank you for your work. Thank you for helping us. And thank you for getting this system where it needed to be, and getting our employees paid, because that's really what is the most important, is making sure that they're getting their extra duty pay, their vacation pay, their, you know, whatever the different differentials that needed to be fixed, getting those all fixed. So thank you, appreciate it. And I'm going to let the next person go.
Always my pleasure.
Thank you, Trustee Wright. Trustee Young, and then Trustee Cavazos.
There we go. You can hear me now, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay. Thank you for this presentation, and I know it had to keep some of you all awake at night, trying to wonder what was going on and how could you make it happen and how could you fix it, and all the ups and downs with people being upset, and rightly so, about pay. So kudos to you all for not pulling out all your hair, okay? It's a lot. You made a couple things, and I was following your comments about the cross-function, and that it was more than just payroll, and that you are looking at the HR part of it, and plus the finance part of it, and you had a couple great examples about the extension of it, the enhancement of it. What do you see quickly in the future in terms of this system that can grow into other arms? And not right now. I know you're just trying to take care of the 80% remediation is what I heard you say, but there's 20% I guess you're still working on. But what do you see in the future that could be other parts connected to this that could expand into the growth of the school district, if there is such an opportunity for that?
There is absolutely. And what I wanted to say before I answer is that I appreciate the applause and the thank yous, but definitely the hard work is being done internally. You know, the implementing partners recognition and support, and also internally CCSD and their support staff, and also everybody that's staying up after hours testing these deliverables. It's remarkable, and very much appreciate that for everybody. You know, everybody that's doing that. Now my answer as it relates to the capabilities, you have a very robust system now. Once it's stabilized, there's many what we call modules, right? Functional components that can be incorporated into it and share the same database. You know, an ERP system, the heart and soul of every ERP system is the accounting, the general ledger. And from there, it branches out to like what you see now, so the HCM system, the payroll. It could be procurement, it could be you know, CRM. There's so many components that you can incorporate into this platform. So yes, the possibilities are great within this system, and I believe you guys have a good team to be able to grow and optimize when in due course.
Thank you, and I only have about 40 seconds left, but I just want to say to you, I know it's been a struggle to get the legs up under everything stable. You know, you got a three-legged stool that can kind of wobble a little bit, so I appreciate that. But I also think it does have the capacity to grow into much more than what we have currently. And again, kudos to all of you all for the staff and the team that's helping to make this work.
Much appreciated.
Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Young. You had a quick follow-up, Trustee Cavazos?
Yes, just real quick. Mr. Del Prado, I just wanted to be clear. Am I correct that we are not completely at the full operational model point yet? Is that correct? But I know we've made great progress with your assistance. Is that correct? As far as not at the full operational model point yet?
That is a correct statement. I think we are very close to it, but until all remediation items are closed, I wouldn't say that I'm comfortable with saying we're there yet. And also, as you know, one more component is as the CCSD operations team is now becoming more involved in the system. Remediation, processes are being remediated, so they're acclimating into the system. They're finding additional opportunities. I won't call them gaps, but opportunities for the system to provide even greater accuracy and functionality. And those are then getting listed out as support items that need to be closed out as well. After every project, there's a stabilization phase, and it ranges from a month to 6 months, depending on the magnitude of the delivery. In this instance, obviously, we went live maybe a little prematurely. There's a lot more work to be done to stabilize, but I would say that we're getting closer. So although my expectation is we'll be 95% complete with all remediation items, I think the payroll team will rest a little bit easier, but they'll still need that support until we close out these other support items. And that takes a little time, but I think my assumption is I can tell you, my plan is by the first week of June is to have a sit-down meeting with all my stakeholders to make a determination. Are you comfortable yet? Can we go to a state support model versus a project model? Or can we have some complemented process? Again, with the key goal of making sure that we're taking care of every employee and making sure they're getting paid properly. That's the primary objective. And if it means that we need to make a hard decision to continue a process, then that's the way we're going to do it. But my goal is to make sure that the system is doing at least what's been committed to be done.
Thank you so much, Mr. Del Prado. And just briefly, can you address how important it is to have a backup as far as leadership? Like if we have someone who has to leave for whatever reason, or retires, or is not with us anymore to supervise, can you address that briefly, please?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, transition management change management itself is living and breathing in every day of our life, in any operations or whatsoever. And that means that not only the education and the training, the mitigation of tribal knowledge and making sure that it's in written form or documented form where somebody else can pick up the ball and continue moving is paramount to the success of any project, right? You never want to put yourself in a high dependency with somebody that's human, because we are susceptible to so many things. We can win the lottery, something can happen to us, or we can get sick, and all of a sudden all full operation is impacted. Not only that person is impacted, but everybody that's even our employees that get paid. So so what we're doing right now, and it's not the only step that we're taking, so please don't think that this is something that I'm completely satisfied with, but we are going through the continuation, the training, the knowledge transfers, and the workshops, and we're recording every one of those, and then we will fine tune those and put them in the library. The next step is making sure that we do a process documentation, that we understand our process, that if somebody new were to walk in, they can read through this and understand what steps need to be done to accomplish a process. So there are many components. There's train the trainer. There's making sure that our management is well acclimated to every subordinate's processes and understands where they can reach out and understand to get the collateral they need to be able to transition that to a new party. So that's again, my long-winded answer.
No, but it was very thorough and greatly appreciated. And thank you so much. I think that is a component that we need to consider as we go forward. And thank you again.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Trustee Cavazos. Trustee Garvey?
Thank you. And I want to thank you for all the work that you're doing too, because this has been extremely frustrating, I think, for not only the board, but all of our staff that were affected by those functional gaps that you spoke about. I know you addressed the fact that we're now going through those and testing and making sure that we really are testing them to the full extent. But I guess my question is, how can the board be reassured that even with the challenges of COVID, that we are testing to the full extent? Because during this time period, we're not experiencing the same type of prep buyouts or grants, partially funded positions or hours, or those kind of things. So what are you doing to ensure that those type of scenarios are being tested, and how are you overcoming the challenges of having the team work really effective during COVID?
Yeah, excellent questions, and I think I'd flip it around, right? So the remediation items and the focus was pre-COVID. So those elements that you have mentioned have been topics of discussion continuously. Now, with our current landscape, the complemented discussion is the nuances related to COVID, but nobody's losing sight of the foundational expectations of the system. As a matter of fact, it's just highlighting opportunities where we need to plan just in case something like this ever occurs in our history, right? Now the dedication and time that's being spent by our process team, our payroll team, our HR team is highly present, because they understand that if I was to just overlook this and say it seems okay, let's go ahead and move it forward, they're the ones that are going to own that process. They're the ones that are going to struggle with it. So there is skin in the game on all sides to make sure that this is successful, and they are testing it end to end. And sometimes it might lean a little bit frustrating that testing is not being done as fast as one would expect, but that speaks to the thoroughness that they're doing to go through their testing cycle.
Okay, thank you so much. And also, this is more for, I guess, Superintendent Jara. And when we talk about that tribal knowledge and being able to have continuity as we move forward, in a future presentation on the HCM update, if you could bring back information to the board on what you see as our landscape of talent pool and pipeline within this department as we trade off from our implementer and consultant over to our actual staff. What does that look like? Do we need to invest more resources or personnel to make sure that we do have a pipeline that holds up to multiple retirements, because people all got hired at the same time, and so now they're able to retire at the same time, or other things that may disrupt that pipeline and leave us in a precarious position.
Trustee Garvey?
Yes.
Trustee Ford?
Thank you. I was having a little bit of connection issues, so I'm not sure if this question got answered or not, but do we know how many employees we currently still owe payroll to, and what the total amount of that is?
So I believe that was a discussion that was had internally in the past, and there is some alignment. In my case, you can chime in, but there was some alignment with payroll. We can try to get some of those metrics.
I could address that, Trustee Ford. So currently, there's no way to specifically identify what's remaining. It's more so a matter of the data that has to be analyzed. Of that quarantined data set that we identified early on that they're working through, I think initially it was about 1,000 rows or more than that. But currently we're at about 800 rows remaining that need to be vetted. That's not to say that 800 rows will have a pay impact. Based historically, what we've seen in terms of like analyzed data resulting in actual underpayment, in which require a check issuance, we're looking at about 24%. So just an estimate as far as what's remaining, we're looking at possibly 192 checks or 192 instances that may require check issuance of some sort.
And do we know the amount?
That would just, I mean, again, that's just the number of rows or within the data set and a potential estimate of revealing themselves as a potential underpayment. But, at this point, I would imagine it's relatively low, but we don't have an idea until we actually analyze the data, or until payroll analyzes the data.
When will that happen?
They're currently working on it now, so as mentioned, I mean, they've been working on it since they quarantined the data. I believe they started with, like I said, approximately 5,000 rows, maybe a little more. They're down to 800, and I think they figure they could get it fully worked through either by the end of this month or June, maybe done.
Okay, just to be clear, have we had a payroll go through without any issues yet?
Yes. I'd let Mike speak to that, but yes, we've had some clean payrolls.
Okay.
And absolutely. Now, yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. I was listening.
Oh, okay. So my case is absolutely correct. So there's been at least a couple cycles of correct payroll processing. That does not speak to the system's clean functionality. That speaks to the dedication and back-end support that's being done by the Cherry Road team, as well as the internal process team, the payroll team, and the HR team. So there's not no work that's being done to assure that. And I know that looking back and identifying other elements like those 800 rows and doing root cause and correction on those are very, very important. We want to make sure that we're not digging another hole by neglecting the forward process. So there is time. There is a strategy behind it for sure.
Okay, it seems like I've heard even recently in recent payrolls that people were still missing things, but we can look at that another time. I just want to, I know this has been it's been really tough for, all our employees. It's been tough for everybody working on this, the board, so I do agree with, the importance of looking at the past, like Trustee Brooks was saying, and seeing what we did wrong and making sure not to do that again. There's always stuff to be gained from hindsight. I also believe that we can't change it at this point. We can't go back in time, so we just have to make do with where we are and do the best from here on out. But to turn it into an opportunity, I think a good lesson for all of us to take from this is maybe we can all be more understanding about employees who are struggling or who maybe don't get it right the first time or the first couple years. And, quite frankly, if everybody who was involved in this was getting assessed, they would all get inefficient. And we don't give that kind of leniency to most of our employees. So I would like to turn it into an opportunity in the future, even if, we're having those conversations about teacher and employee retainment. Maybe we could even compare it to the situation and say, what kind of understanding did we maybe give the people involved in this situation that we could carry over to understanding for different departments and different jobs. So that's my opinion. I don't blame anybody. I think it was a good idea to do it. I don't know what we would have done differently. It was really important to get done. It saved us a lot of money. However, it did affect a lot of people negatively, and it still is. So let's try to be very considerate to the people that have been affected by it, work on getting it fixed 100% as soon as possible, and keep that in the back of our minds when when thinking through our employees and different staffs' assessments and their efficiency in their role. And that's all I have.
That's a very well stated, Trustee Ford, and I completely agree with you. And lessons learned will happen, and I guarantee you that.
Thank you, Trustee Ford. Before I turn it over to Superintendent Jara, I just want to reiterate some of what Trustee Ford said, especially about looking back, figuring out what went wrong, figuring out how we can fix it. But I also want to look at this through another lens, and I would like to look at what the staffing levels are in that department and whether or not that department is appropriately staffed to handle this, as well as budget cuts that we've done in that department over the last several years. Okay, so if you can include those in the future as well. Superintendent Jara?
Yes, Madam President, members of the board. Well said. I was just going to say something we're looking at. And before we go, I want the board to be very clear that before we move into a phase 2, we certainly have to address the phase 1, what we're doing with Mr. Del Prado and the internal team to address the needs before we move forward in the next implementation. And if it's the pleasure of the board, maybe another update on HCM every 6 weeks or between this and COVID. I think this is very important for us to be continuing to share with the board on our current implementation and how we're doing, what we're doing to mitigate it, and looking at some of the implementation staffing as well as the need that we have. So if it's the pleasure of the board, we can bring this back in June sometime, or maybe 6 weeks from now, to continue to make sure that this is in the forefront of the board and the public as well.
Superintendent Jara, do we know what the how far out phase 2 would be? Or I guess Mr. Del Prado?
Mr. Del Prado will be the person.
Okay.
Yeah, we are gathering requirements as it relates to phase 2. And then we are studying the criticality on those as well. So there is a list, and we haven't had that meeting and discussion yet. But depending on the priority and the need and the impact for delaying, we might create a short list and have either a 1A or a small phase 2 down the pike, probably to be discussed early June.
So my suggestion for bringing this back would be to present the board with a presentation assuring us that you have fixed all of the existing problems before you move to phase 2, and then how we are going to mitigate any potential issues going into phase 2.
Perfect.
Thank you, Mr. Del Prado. Thank you, Mr. Casey. We appreciate the presentation, and we will see you soon.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, trustees, we're going to move on to agenda item 6.1, superintendent communication. Superintendent Jara?
Yes, Madam President, members of the board, as we started doing a few months ago before COVID, bringing in our principal appointees that we were appointing, but we're doing this virtually, so we're not calling them in. But I have the honor and pleasure to let you know that Andrea Hill will be the new principal at John Dooley Elementary School. Ms. Hill was selected to be the new principal. She has been with CCSD for the past 15 years and has served as the assistant principal for the past 4 years at Health, Hudson Elementary, and has been a teacher and a learning strategist. So excited that she's taking over the reins over at John Dooley. And also Jamie Witt, she will be the new principal at Sumaro Elementary School in Region 3. She comes to us, has been with CCSD for 15 years, has served as assistant principal for the past 5 years at Dr. C. Owen Rowdy and Vegas Verde, and was most recently at Sister Robert Joseph Bailey Elementary, and has been a teacher and an instructional coach. So very excited to appoint the two wonderful candidates as new principals. So they start very soon. The other thing I wanted to just let the board know, last night I had a great meeting with the Casserly Executive Board. One of the things that they talked about with me was consistent messaging, not only internally, but also externally, and really excited to partner with us on that. One of the things that we also talked about, really about messaging, and their principals were concerned about, obviously with COVID-19. One of the things that I was made very clear is that we will not be making a decision, or actually we will be making a final decision on graduations. I said to this board that we will not have any cars participating or students participating with cars during graduation ceremonies because of the inequities. The principals are consistent with that message as well. So we told them that, and we will be sending communication to parents. There's a lot of conversation. We're going to communicate to parents that we'll make a decision once we go into phase 2. We will continue to follow the governor's orders with stay home and follow the social distance guideline. I know that there's certain graduate schools and communities that are pushing. So I wanted the board to know we will be sending communication to families that we will make a final decision once we get into phase 2 as determined by the governor and the health officials. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Jara. Okay, with that, we're going to close out that agenda item. We're going to move to 6.2, trustee requests for agenda items for information.
Trustee Brooks, if I could have an agenda item. I know with the upcoming budget cuts that we may be looking at, and as schools look to do their strategic budgets, the librarian position again is under attack. In our past investigation of this, it was very concerning to me that there are several areas where children from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade do not have a librarian or a librarian experience in that entire time. So I know that the law does allow for there to be a different staff person in that position, but that they still have to meet the criteria as outlined in NRS. I don't really feel, though, that the board has any way that has been presented to them to have informational oversight on that. So I would like an agenda item to discuss how we can put in place structures that allow the board to have instructional, informational oversight on if those duties and responsibilities are truly being met.
Okay, so as that, I would suggest maybe we start with the policy around librarians, and then we can build out from there. Okay, but I can follow up with you afterwards if necessary.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Trustee Cavazos?
Thank you, Trustee Brooks. I would like to request an item having to do with basically the structure of the school reopening committee. I'm not sure exactly how to phrase this, so maybe you can help me out with this. There's been a lot of interest from the community, all the community entities, education and business, parents, staff. Would just like to have like some information on the criterion used to select the members of the committee, and also how we are going to be receiving regular updates.
Okay, so a request for information about how the committee was selected and how we will be updated about the progress. Is that correct?
Thank you. Very good.
You're welcome. Trustee Ford? Or I think maybe Trustee Young. Trustee Ford and then Trustee Young.
Thank you. I just want to request, based on the presentation that we saw today from the Council of Great City Schools, I know that there was a lot of information that we still have to process, as well as a lot of questions that kind of went unanswered around what we're going to do to solve those problems. So I'd like to have a presentation about what we put into place to solve these problems, maybe a couple of them 3 months apart for the near future. And then we can think if we need them that much afterwards. But I would like at least in the next 3 months an update, and then probably 3 months after that as well.
Okay, we'll start with one presentation, and then we'll go from there. So just an update on the work that we are going to do, and then we'll build on that. Okay.
Yep, thank you.
You're welcome, Trustee Young. Trustee Young, are you there? you are, could you unmute yourself?
Yeah, wow, this thing can be hard to figure out.
That's okay.
Okay. Okay, I was bouncing all around trying to get in. Sometimes I get in and sometimes I don't. Okay, I just have a couple agenda items I'd like for us to consider. One, at least every other week or at least once a month, can we get an update on the access in terms of where the Chromebooks are by schools and by district? I know we talked about that. And I know we were, I'm not sure if we've gotten to that point or not, even by districts, because of Chromebooks and internet access and distance education may be in and out of here for a while. So that I can tell people where to go to find out that information, and for myself as well. And I know we talked about that.
We did. Before you go on, that request was met. It actually is in Smartsheet, and we will have a formal training, but that is actually sent to you as an attachment. So we definitely did get that information.
Okay, so we do have it.
Yes.
Now, how can we get it to people? I mean, you're going to teach me how to do it. What do I do? Do I send it out to people? How do they get the information?
Since this is just a request for information right now, and we really can't have a dialogue in this section, I can follow up with you after.
Okay, well, help me to do that, because I really need to let other people know.
I will definitely help you.
Okay, thank you. And then, and I've said this before, and I'm not sure if this has been acted on or not. Can we have information on how companies that are not your standard companies, a minority, well, I don't like the name minority, but companies that are from different cultural groups can access an opportunity to bid on contracts in the school district. And I've talked about this before, but we need to have some kind of structure, agenda, to say to these companies, here's what you do, so that they feel that they can get it. Most of the time they tell me they can't even get a bid. They can't even get the bid. So if we could do that.
I will make sure that's added to Smartsheet and attached.
Okay, but keep in mind again, it's good for me, but let these people know. And then my only final agenda item request. And I want to say this is for the trustees.
Superintendent Jara, can you mute your microphone, please?
Yes. Oh, okay. I thought he was saying.
Oh, were you talking to us? Okay. Go ahead, trustee. Sorry.
Okay. And I'll work with Cindy, and I'm working with Lisa. I think it's important that the trustees give out information. My newsletters have stopped, and I'm working with Cindy and Lisa about, even if it's just a repeat of what's going on here or what's going on in the district, that we put it in some kind of format to our constituents, to our schools. And I'm trying to get that done. My newsletter, I always do a newsletter every month. And so I'm working with Lisa and Cindy, and I think trustees, even if it's just a little note or something to all of your schools and constituents or people that come to your meetings, to encourage them, or just to know that your face is still there. And that's just my thought. I think we should think about our own communication system, an agenda item about our communication system.
So we can add that to the work session that's coming up in June, if you would like.
I would.
Okay. All right, that works for me.
Okay, I'm done.
Thank you. And that's all we have in the queue, so I am going to close out this agenda item.
Oh,
Trustee Young, what were you saying?
Just one more.
Okay.
I'm on the board for the Channel 10 program board structure. I'm sorry, I'm getting kind of bouncy in my head right now. And I'm under a board of directors. It would be good for us to have an update of what Channel 10 is doing and continues to do during COVID-19. I saw some beautiful things they were doing on TV the other day. And I think if people know more about what's happening, and this is going through the school district, with Tom Axel and the whole group over there, still, it's a wonderful thing. So could we get an update? I'll put that on the agenda, have Tom and his staff share some of the things that they're doing.
We can request information to be shared about what they are doing.
They could share information or just remind people of the resources that are there. Maybe a small little 5-minute PowerPoint or just an update.
Or it could be something that's an event. We can work offline on something that works for you. Okay. Like the partnership. Okay.
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 Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm done.
All right, we are going to close out of that item. We're going to move to agenda item 7.1, public comment on non-agenda items. So members of the public were instructed to submit their comments through email. Cindy Crone has summarized each comment received on non-agenda items, and she'll read the summary as well as the name of the person submitting the comment. And as a reminder, all written responses are attached as backup on Board Docs so that anybody can access them at any time. Cindy Crone, are you there?
I am. Madam President, members of the board, Superintendent Jara. Autumn Tampa wrote that the CCSD Board of Trustees should determine your own process for public comment during this COVID-19 crisis, which shows the public the respect and consideration they have earned and deserve. Daniel Shentel wrote that he is pleased with the support and proactive nature the district and board has taken to provide the best educational environment for our students. He said the CCSD guitar teachers would like guidance on how teachers can share guitars within the classroom once students are permitted to attend classes in school buildings. Anita Hernandez asked if substitutes are the only other employees in Nevada who are ineligible to receive unemployment compensation during the summer months and to receive unemployment during the pandemic like others are. Ms. Hernandez included a copy of the email that was sent to all CCSD employees regarding reasonable assurance summer 2020. Christine Copeland would like substitute teachers to receive a salary that they could live on throughout the year. She has been subbing since 2013 and wages are not enough to live on. Maria Isabel Salcido wrote that she is a long-term sub in an at-risk vacancy. She has to act as, do as, and be as a licensed teacher without the same benefits and such little pay. She is concerned when she has to call in sick, she will lose a day without pay. She would like to see increased sub pay and add benefits that support staff have. Melissa Johnson wrote that she has subbed in the district over 10 years and takes vacancy positions, so she is able to receive $150 per day. She would like to see substitutes receive affordable, good health insurance for their families and better pay, including holiday pay. She would also like to receive unemployment benefits during the summer months. Otherwise, she thinks many substitutes will need to look for other jobs. Robert Drinkwine would like to see realistic compensation for CCSD substitute teachers. He has over 33 years of experience conducting classroom and on-hand training. He said substitute teachers deserve fair pay and benefits for the services they provide. He would like the district to appropriately compensate long-term substitutes. Maggie Longley is concerned with the lack of respect for guest teachers. She said guest teachers are required to take tests, view yearly webinars, teach, manage discipline, go on duty, and protect children, all for $12.50 an hour. She said guest teachers need a higher wage and better benefits. Marvin Neiman stated that he has been a substitute teacher for 10 years. He said substitutes work all day without a prep period and without earning extra pay, whereas teachers do when they sub during their prep. He said substitutes save the district a lot of money when they cover for a teacher and requests an increase of $100.
And substitutes do save the district a whole lot of money when they're covering for teachers. And the teachers having the ability to use their, their vacation time, they use it. I mean, they use some time when they should be using that time for professional development. It's just crazy because they don't have the outcomes. And it's just real. We have a right to have some expectations.
$150 per day. Lanisha Parnell Brooks wrote that she is a hardworking substitute teacher and loves her job and the students she comes in contact with. She would appreciate a salary increase. Ellen Ruth Van Solen wrote that she is concerned with the low rate of pay for substitute teachers and would like to see an increase in pay. She would like to see benefits offered to substitutes who work a specific number of days each month, as well as extended benefits during the summer months. She has been a long-term sub for 4 years and feels the $150 a day does not compensate her for the irregular pays and missed pay dates. Martha Simon thanked the board for their interest in discussing the wage and benefits and asked that they receive wage and benefits that they are asking for. Walter Jones has asked what the district is doing to subsidize income for teachers and support staff who normally work during the summer hours. He also said there are families in District C that do not have access to technology. He said some students do not perform well with classroom settings, therefore Chromebook learning may not be the best learning environment as some are in need of a teacher in front of them. Rika Diddley said pay for substitutes would be increased because they should be increased because they play a vital and essential role for the district.
No, they don't. Substitutes just there to cover for the teacher that day. Staff and permanent staff have a responsibility to the children.
She feels the district would have more substitutes if they receive a living wage. She mentioned that long-term substitutes are responsible for all the work as a licensed teacher would be responsible for, but are paid significantly lower. She also said the cost of living has rose. However, the substitute pay has remained the same. Lisa Moraka wrote that paying substitute teachers would benefit CCSD. A more diverse group of people would consider becoming substitutes. More substitutes would continue to work for CCSD instead of looking for other employment. Vicki Kreidel wrote that she is disturbed by the disparities in how different schools are handling the end-of-year cleanup and procedures. Some are giving staff 3 to 4 hours to clear their rooms, some a couple of days. Others have asked educators to be in their classrooms every day next week. She is concerned with safety and asks that guidelines come from the top. Carolyn Wood asked why Clark County private schools are restricted from opening if social distancing and preventive measures are able to be implemented. She asked if there's any concerns about teachers choosing not to return to school due to distance learning and asked what measures CCSD has in place for reopening. Alexis Salt expressed frustration with the lack of educators and support professionals on the committee to reopen schools. She said that the committee is made up of many of the same voices that are frequently heard within CCSD. Gil Lopez supports the suggestion made by Trustee Irene Cepeda at the May 7th meeting, where summer school sessions have become available at no cost to teachers, especially those attending Title I schools. He is concerned that many children have not been contacted during the current school closure and that tuition-free summer school can be part of the remedial plan going forward. Vicki Kreidel is just...
Oh, wait a minute. Tuition-free summer school? Are you serious? Summer school has never costed, but it is a way for extended year of service for children who have disabilities to continue and to remain in class. I am just so confused.
Disturbed at how the reopening school committee has evolved. She said it is imperative that everyone feel like they have a seat at the table. She feels several groups are not considered or represented, and asked that additional members be added to bring much needed perspectives as the district begins to reopen. And Jenna Robertson expressed concern with who are not members on the reopening committee. She mentioned the difficulty in trying to reach out to be considered for the position. She would have liked to see new and diverse faces at the table and a more inclusive selection process. And that's all we have received.
Thank you, Ms. Crone. I appreciate it. We greatly appreciate it. And we are going to close out public comments and move to agenda item 8, adjournment.
Oh my goodness.
Trustees?
Let's just adjourn, shall we?
I'm not to adjourn.
Yeah, I didn't know if you had anything else you wanted.
Trustee Young, and I'm looking for a second.
I'll second.
Was that Trustee Cavazos?
Yes, please.
Trustees, I have a motion by Trustee Young, a second by Trustee Cavazos. Trustees, please cast your vote for adjournment by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, I don't think Trustee Wright is on anymore, so that passes 5-0, noting Trustee Wright and Trustee Cepeda are not in attendance currently. The time is 8:38, and this meeting is adjourned.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Night.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.
Good night.
And there was a board meeting. Okay, we can stop it right there, and I can encourage more people to log on, to follow the process, and to become engaged. Really, I mean, because public education depends on you. And when you look in the mirror, don't look for anyone else. It just depends on you and your ability to, understand that the process must continue. And we as a community have to demand accountability. So I'm going to end the recording for now.